G'day, May 40 here. I'm not exactly thrilled with Trump's picks, but I find them incredibly exciting. And the bigger issue that I want to focus on this morning is, can this populist Trump administration govern effectively? First time round did okay, but will the second Trump term be more effective? And if you're simply looking at effectiveness and expertise, many of these Trump picks seem to fail to miss the mark. All right, if you really want to turn back the deep state, you'd think you'd need more impressive candidates than the ones that Donald Trump has nominated. In particular, Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, and Bobby Kennedy for Health and Human Services Secretary. Let's get a little analysis here from the All In podcast.
This process by which there is some significant growth for a period of time, and then there is an extinction event or an external force that causes what ultimately becomes what's called punctuated equilibrium. So the whole kind of system resets, and then the healthier, stronger species survive, and they grow and they persist. And if you look at the first chart, Nick, that I pulled up, this will just show you guys past extinction events. Large amounts of biomass over the past 500 million years get wiped out when these extinction events occur. And then evolution occurs because the species that can survive the extinction event persist in the environment and they grow. And that's how evolution kind of actually takes place, is there's an external force that changes what survives and what doesn't. It's kind of a testing force. If you look at federal spending, and this is a crazy link, but here's federal spending over the last couple of decades. And I would argue that many of the agencies, much of the bureaucracy, many of the jobs created, many of the spending programs, many of the operating models, many of the behaviors can kind of be viewed as a species or species within this ecosystem that have kind of grown a lot over the last few decades. And I think what Trump's mandate was by the people, and people don't want to hear this and they don't like it, but his mandate was to be kind of the extinction event. And whatever agencies, whatever operating processes, whatever individuals, whatever bureaucratic systems exist within the federal government that can withstand the scrutiny of the individuals that Trump is going to put in charge of each of these agencies, that they can survive and they can come out the other end, there is certainly some degree of strength and resilience and hardiness. This is not about right or wrong.
You say they deserve to exist if they can survive.
I'm saying this is going to bring.
Right. So for me, this is about the most optimistic perspective possible on the more outlandish Trump picks.
In the most disruptive force that federal agencies have ever seen. And the intention with Trump isn't to find some person to keep running things the way they have been run in the past. His mandate from the people who elected him, based on the message he put out there, is to do the opposite, which is to go in and be as disruptive and damaging and destructive as possible. And whatever comes out the other side will be stronger, will be hardier, and theoretically will be, more resilient.
That's an incredibly optimistic take. All right. This is trying to come up with some reason why Trump's more outlandish picks won't be a complete and utter disaster.
And I think that that's the event that's underway. Now, the people who are getting exactly what they want in Trump's candidacies are the Democrats. They were saying Trump is going to put a bunch of crazy lunatics in office and he's going to make them the cabinet, and now they're able to kind of clap their hands and say, "We told you so, we told you so." And I'm not sure that if they're really getting the message, which is that the intention here isn't to keep things running the way they have been running, but to really fundamentally test the systems. And test the systems with the most challenging oppositional forces the systems have ever been tested by, which is the candidates or the individuals that he's putting in charge of each of these agencies. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong one way or the other, but I'm making an observation that this is going to be kind of an extinction level event, that Trump's decisions on who he's putting in place, I think, are going to drive an outcome on the other end that's going to make the government look very different. And I'm not going to sit around and say this person's good, this person's bad, because I don't think the point is to find someone that's, quote, qualified to do the job. The intention is actually quite different. And the outcome.
That's a sharp observation, right? Donald Trump clearly isn't looking for people who are qualified to do the job.
May actually be positive for America if you fast forward a couple of years in some cases. And there's some cases where things could get really messed up and people could suffer and jobs will be lost and All sorts of bad things will happen, but we cannot continue the way we have been with respect to federal spending, bureaucracy, and inefficiency in the federal government. And so something has to happen. And if this is the path by which this gets resolved in the limited window that's in front of this particular administration, which is probably 2 years, maybe 4, maybe this is what has to happen.
Metaphor here that we're sending meteors into each of these departments to blow them up and see if they survive an extinction level event. I saw you nodding. Do you think this is an interesting framing?
Let's take Elon and Vivek off the table because
that's an obvious one that we all have been behind since the beginning. Yeah. And we all support the idea. Who's not against more efficiency? I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to be against efficiency. It's like the easiest one to say you love.
I think the highest beta pick so far has been Bobby Kennedy. I think the second highest beta pick is Matt Gaetz.
Explain highest beta pick in this context, please.
I think the third is Tulsi Gabbard. That there is the potential for an enormously positive 2 or 3 sigma outcome, but there's also the chance that it can really not work.
That was exactly why I picked Bobby Kennedy, because he's going to shake it up, right?
Peter Thiel just did this podcast with Bari Weiss, and
it was fantastic, by the way. Highly recommend.
Highly recommend.
He's awesome.
And one of the great things he said is that he was talking about science, but I think the example works here as well, which is that we didn't have enough skepticism and we had too much dogma. He was talking about sort of like the death of science. And I think that idea applies here as well, which is that the federal bureaucracy has not really been challenged. And Vivek put out a very compelling post on X where he basically said, like, look, on the one hand, there's going to be radical transparency, but on the other hand, there's a lot of case law that we can use to kind of try to really dismantle the government apparatus. And they're putting themselves on a shot clock to do it by 2026 for the 250th anniversary. So I think I'm really predisposed to this idea that it'll force the government to be very resilient at the end of this process. And I think that's a good thing. And it'll probably be very different than what it is on the way in. And I think that can be very positive.
All right. So we got Chamath and myself actually giving some specific names that we thought were interesting. I'll go back to you, Sachs. Maybe I'll phrase it as, to Chamath's phrasing, which one do you think has the greatest chance of creating a massive potential change that could be positive, but also has some possibility of a destructive downside? In other words, it could go either way, but man, if it goes the right way, it could be brilliant and amazing and great for all Americans. Who would be your number 1, number 2 in that regard?
Well, you have to identify what the potential downside is. I think the single biggest risk in a second Trump term is that somehow the United States gets into an unnecessary war, a war that we don't need, another forever war. It's certainly not what President Trump wants. He's been abundantly clear on the campaign trail that he wants to avoid wars. He wants to avoid World War III. It's clearly where all of his instincts are. But the fact of the matter is we have a very fraught and difficult international situation right now. The Middle East is on fire. We have a proxy war going on with Russia. So there is the chance that things could always spiral out of control. And you need, I think, within the cabinet, not just hawkish voices, but also dovish voices, so that the president has the full range of options at his disposal. And so in that sense, I would say that, Tulsi as being one of the more dovish voices is incredibly critical, just to balance out some of the other voices who are more hawkish. And so in that sense, I think, just making sure that the president gets to hear from a wide spectrum of views, I think that part's very important.
So that would be Tulsi. Tulsi would be your pick for
Yeah, just because Tulsi could literally make the difference between whether we get in a unnecessary forever war or not. I would also just say that with respect to the other picks, there's obviously a lot of hysteria going on, a lot of hyperbole about the downsides. I don't think it's going to be like a meteor hitting the earth. I don't think it's that destructive. I think that it's more like, will some eggs be broken up to make an omelet, right? That's the analogy I would use rather than the meteor. And the thing I would just say is that we all agree the United States is currently on an unsustainable fiscal path. We know that we're spending too much money. We know that the bureaucracy is too big. What's the downside of shaking it up? There's just way more upside than downside in terms of shaking up this bureaucracy.
Because the current path is bankruptcy.
Exactly. So why do we have to act like that it's so risky to bring in outsiders and populists and reformers into these agencies? We know there's going to be huge resistance to them. The biggest risk, frankly, is inertia taking over, and the reformers aren't able to do enough, and we all
doing nothing is not an option.
Yeah, and then we go bankrupt. That's the big risk.
Why is Tulsi getting attacked? What's the Russian connection? People are saying, I don't know any of the history here, so tell me.
It's obvious. It's because Washington is a very hawkish place. It's basically run by the war machine. There's no money going to Washington to lobby for peace. All the money in Washington is coming from the military.
Right, that's such an obvious point. There's no well-funded peace lobby. All right, you run on a peace platform. There's no lobby that's going to fund you. right? The funding is for usually a more hawkish foreign policy. The people who are in our foreign policy establishment generally do it for a sense of excitement and meaning and to change the world, which means we have all these incentives towards an interventionist foreign policy and very few institutional incentives towards a restrained foreign policy.
Industrial complex. So by definition, it's extremely hawkish and it's geared towards war. And Tulsi,
but is there some history with Tulsi in Russia? Yeah.
Just to finish my point.
Yeah.
Tulsi has been one of the few consistent voices advocating for peace. So of course, the establishment wants to basically get her nomination vetoed. But again, I think you have to see the cabinet as a package deal. I think it's very important to have Tulsi as one voice for peace within a large.
Okay, great point there. There is no lobby supporting peace. There's no lobby that's going to be funding peace in the United States political system right now. All right, populists win elections. How often do they govern effectively? So I would see the Ronald Reagan foreign policy as effective in that it led to the fall of the Soviet Union. It was a key contributing factor in the fall of the Soviet Union. Bill Clinton's economic policies, with a lot of prompting from Newt Gingrich and the Republicans in the House of Representatives, he produced our first budget and only budget surpluses in the federal government budget. He paid down our national debt in 1990s. We had a thriving economy in the 1990s. So Bill Clinton on domestic economic policy would be an example of a government that governs effectively. Ronald Reagan foreign policy overall strikes me as a good role model. Right, this guy, I like him, Samo Burja. And he's talking about why populists win elections but fail to govern. What are the obstacles for effective governance from populists?
And, in a way, it's cool that you allow Elon to sue. What was it? The Federal Aviation, I forget, the FAA? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool that you can sue the FAA and that they let up on making you chase down SEALs and torture them with sounds of rocket launches. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Where they had to demonstrate how distressed the SEALs are. So you have to kind of abduct a SEAL and it had to play this audio. That was kind of insane. But that's cool. But wouldn't it be even cooler if you tasked the FAA directly to increase the number of launches? That their mandate and their new KPI is the number of successful launches. That's cooler, right? And I think to do that, you need someone to run the thing and you need to fire a bunch of people. And, I think that the call could be made. And the key question is, can they get it through the Republican Party? So I think perhaps not to Donald Trump's surprise, because I'm sure he's seen this before, but perhaps to Elon's surprise, in about a month or two, it'll turn out that the biggest obstacle to any great dreams of reforming the American government he has at this point will be the ostensible allies of the Republican Party, right? Because you can't convince me that it's not, let's say the Marco Rubio appointment is not straightforwardly the Republican Party business as usual. And the Republican Party business as usual, I kind of don't massively care if they run the country or if the Democratic Party business as usual run the country, because I think while some things will be slightly different, it's much like Hungary, right? It doesn't outperform the counterfactual that much, right? Slightly more balanced budget, maybe slightly higher fertility. You get to the same place, you're just going with a slower speed.
And when I think about sort of Democratic Party as usual, some people say it's like Obama, some people say it's like Pelosi, Schumer, there's sort of a nexus of power. What is sort of the equivalent on the Republican side? What is Republican Party business as usual?
First off, to acknowledge, it was actually unclear whether President Harris would have been the Democratic Party as usual. I think both sides are perhaps seeing a slow motion succession failure. There's a reason all the very formidable Democratic Party politicians, except maybe Gavin Newsom is now still left in AOC, they're all old. Elizabeth Warren is getting quite old now compared to the peak of her career. In 6-7 years, she'll be like a Nancy Pelosi-like figure. And Nancy Pelosi is this elder statesman from the 20th century, just still pulling all the strings, kingmaker of who gets to be the Democratic Party's presidential candidate. So I think that the Republican Party side, it's sort of, you could imagine some people maybe Rand Paul doing something interesting, but outside of Trump himself, there's shockingly little. Let's put it this way. The most interesting right-wing political figure right now is center-right, is Elon Musk. The second most interesting one is Donald Trump. And
well, what about J.D. Vance? Someone put it in the link, a column from 2009 about Ronald Reagan. So it is hard in 2009 to point to any concrete evidence that the Reagan Revolution fundamentally altered the nation's trajectory toward bloated, centralized interventionist government. Conservatism in the 1980s made its peace with much of liberalism. Republicans and Democrats now argue over how big the bailout should be or how long the troops should remain deployed, rarely about first principles. Well, we now primarily argue along lines of identity. And it feels from my more traditional perspective that the Democratic Party stands for a redefinition of what it means to be human, what it means to be male and female.
I almost don't care who number 3 is. I don't think they're there. It's sort of like maybe the Mavericks, right? The people like literally Tulsi, RFK, but none of those people are going to get confirmed. It's not looking currently like they're even going to try to get them through. So personnel is policy. And I think if one were to pursue this for real, I think what one is really doing is trying to recruit, first trying to beat your own ostensible political allies so they allow the appointment of true outsider talent. Number one, once that is done, use the outsider talent to actually key chunks of the administrative state, because the real power in the United States lies in the administrative state, not in the elected office. It's very telling, for example, that, when I talk to my conservative friends, they're convinced Joe Biden was not running the country. But as soon as Joe Biden leaves the seat and Donald Trump enters it, they are convinced Donald Trump is running the country. Maybe the country's not run from that seat. Maybe it has.
So there is no first world country that has successfully mastered its bureaucracy. By and large, the bureaucracy is immune from judicial review, right? You can't sue government bureaucracy usually. They're usually immune from ultimatums from the executive branch, and they're largely immune from scrutiny from the legislative branch. And no first world nation has found a way to get a handle on its bureaucracy, its entrenched civil servants.
Hasn't been in decades. And, maybe that sounds like, to my conservative friends, that sound like cold water. To my liberal friends, that sounds like a fresh hope. The resistance isn't going to be like as loud, and people will play on the Republican team now, right? So previously the resistance was almost explicitly Democratic Party coded. It was the never Trump stuff, but it was the Democratic Party restraining Donald Trump. It was the sort of left side. And I think currently the right side is going to be constraining Donald Trump. And then as soon as you have party infighting in a populist context, that gets very tricky. You can say that this person is not actually a loyal Republican. You can pull your support from them running in the race, but that doesn't mean you can put your own candidate to win that constituency. Let's think about things like midterms. So you can have a disloyal ostensible ally if you try to replace them in their elected position for the purposes of pushing them to agree to the confirmations. They would just be replaced by a Democrat.
Yeah, fascinating.
It's actually like the game theory is not that clean. And, perhaps, and this sounds just kind of funny, but, it's kind of expensive. It's sort of like if you wanted to have, say, a proper tech takeover of the United States, and I was Elon, I would open this fund and I would go to all of my friends who are now they're congratulating me for my genius. They're all down for it. They're wearing the MAGA hat. They're saying nice things about Trump. They're excited to go to Mars. And you're like, oh, this is so good. Will you pledge $2 billion or $500 million to this fund I'm creating? And this fund's purpose is literally to go around and buy Republicans from their old donor base.
Fascinating.
Right. This is a fascinating argument, right? Spend $20 billion, take over the Republican Party, essentially buy it out.
Them off their old donor base. Like literally targeted bribes.
You were dropping too much interesting ideas that you got censored.
You got immediately canceled. Yeah.
Yeah, you were saying targeted bribes.
No. I would just say be an alternate constituency, right? Be alternate funders of political campaigns, be alternate lobbyists. Just raise, let's say, $40 billion or $20 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, but $20 to $40 billion to buy the Republican Party, I guarantee you no one has attempted that. At the end of the day, there's a question, well, why shouldn't Elon fund it? It's like, well, he already spent $44 billion buying Twitter. And, clearly this did not seem like a great financial choice at the time. Now perhaps it'll turn out to have been a great financial choice.
So I watched the end of the Reagan movie last night, and the last 40 minutes did choke me up. So the first hour and 20 minutes is just a mediocre movie. But somehow the last 40 minutes, they really got to me. I had tears in my eyes at the end.
I guarantee you it would not have been had the Democratic Party won this election. So you want to do this so that people are committed. And, it's not like the other team ever had difficulty raising $10 or $20 billion donations from Silicon Valley. People, once they...
How long have we been talking about Elon Musk? He seems to be dominating conversations for, is it about 15 years now? I mean, who could have imagined 6 months ago that he would become even more of a topic of conversation than he was then? And now he may be the second most influential person in the United States next to Donald Trump. He made a bet, he took a gamble, and it's paid off.
They put their name and money on the line, cannot walk it back. So that's a big deal. Like, that's a big deal. Basically, you want other people to stake on your team. So to, basically provide what I think would be a winning strategy for a proper fast growth US, I think the solution is to have all of the fair weather Trump enthusiasts among Silicon Valley elites commit a significant amount of money to a...
So Elon Musk took over Twitter and paid, what, $50 billion, a giant gamble. And so what this bloke is talking about is spending even less money to try to take over the Republican Party.
Fund, and the fund is used to lobby establishment Republicans and wean them off their pre-existing donor base, because their pre-existing donor base is tied basically to the paper belt, right? We might not think of...
And the chat says, oddly, Luke Ford repeats a drunken nubile woman's very public, lurid comments about performing fellatio as a right-wing triumph. Well, it's all contextual. So in the current environment, men lusting after women is transgressive. All right. And women enjoying being lusted after by men is transgressive. Heterosexual sex is a little bit transgressive. And so in an environment where boys and girls are encouraged to rethink their gender identity, where boys and girls are encouraged to rethink if they're straight or gay, where we're encouraged to think that you can change your sex simply by mutilating yourself and taking hormones, even though your sex is rooted in your chromosomes and cannot be changed. So against that backdrop of a left-wing redefinition of what it means to be human, then a drunk girl talk about you got to spit out that thing is playing in a coded conservative right-wing meme. Right? Not normally, right? Talking about giving a blowjob, is that a right-wing meme? But in the context of all the trans and pro-gay force that is exercised through many of our institutions, against that context, the culture has turned MAGA before this election was won by Trump.
Wall Street is the paper belt, but it kind of is. And Wall Street, Raytheon, and so on, the classic defense industry, even parts of sort of oil, right? I think this kind of has to be done. That would be one possibility. There are other ways, but I think that's the best one. I think the carrot might work better than the stick, because the stick is, Trump denounces you and you lose the election. Well, if you do that to me, then my seat goes to the Democratic Party. So it's like a very limited strategy.
Yeah. One thing Elon is good at doing is putting pressure on, was good at a lot of things, obviously, but, raising money, evangelizing, and putting pressure. So I suspect if Republicans are acting out of line or really trying to sort of thwart him, he will put them on blast in a way that perhaps...
I mean, Donald Trump was never bad at that either, but we saw what the first administration was like. It was a constant sort of like trying to work with establishment figures who 3 months later inevitably betray him. And then all of the Trump supporters inevitably telling me that this is actually brilliant and was the plan all along, and that the next one's going to be different. There were just 4 years of that. Did people forget?
Yeah, but Trump didn't own Twitter, and he's not Elon.
That's true.
Yeah, obviously.
He could Trump could get banned from Twitter. Elon cannot get banned from Twitter. And, Trump doesn't get banned from Twitter now either.
Yeah. And also the social, Zuck complimented, Trump, and, it seems like even the social networks, or at least Meta, is not beholden to the Democrat Party anymore. Maybe Google still is, I don't know. But it's a new sort of battlefield there. It's a new digital sort of space, and we'll see what that means.
Well, I do think...
Okay, here's a few excerpts from this fascinating article by Vox, which is a left-wing publication. Headline, want to understand why Trump won the election? Look at pop culture. From entertainment, how entertainment from Morgan Wallen, don't know who they are, to Twisters, predicted the MAGA pivot. Earlier this year, conservatives on social media claimed an unlikely new icon. It wasn't a podcaster. It was actress Sydney Sweeney, Euphoria star and the recent lead of the romantic comedy Anyone But You. Following her Saturday Night Live hosting gig in March, 2 conservative outlets published columns heralding Sweeney as a return to conventional beauty standards of the 1990s and early 2000s. Right, the giggling blonde with an amazing rack. Both pieces postulate that by wearing low-cut dresses and playing up her sexuality, Sweeney was inviting men to gawk at her, therefore raising a middle finger to woke culture and the Me Too movement. Right, her ascension was seen as a throwback, hyper-feminine sex symbol, given conservatives the rare mainstream Gen Z figure on whom to project their values. And for those paying close attention, Vox says the past year was rife with springboards for the conservative message. So in the hindsight following Trump's election, it seems the zeitgeist of 2024 was a foreshadowing of his return to office. Right, bro country singers became the artists du jour, going head-to-head with female pop singers on the charts and often outperforming them. The buzziest new reality TV shows were about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders and Mormon TikTokers. Conservative films from small distributors like the biopic Reagan and the Daily Wire documentary Am I Racist made millions at the box office. Right, nominally apolitical podcasters and streamers from Joe Rogan to the Nelk Boys hosted Donald Trump. It's all a sharp turn from the liberal-coded pop culture of the Obama years. It's a series of trends that took off in response to Trump's first presidency. You had these comic book movies with a progressive edge, such as Wonder Woman and Black Panther. You had social commentary films like Get Out and Promising Young Woman. You had the explosion of drag culture. And now there's an overall conservative feel to pop culture, a response to the overreach of the Me Too movement and to the notion that masculinity is in crisis. And so we're seeing praise for Sydney Sweeney representing traditional femininity, and the all-American straight white bro is getting renewed cultural attention. So you have Tom Cruise in that Top Gun remake. You have the success of bro podcasters. You have the success of white male country singers. And so we get the headline, 2024 was all about the straight white bro. You see it in mainstream music, country music, all sorts of people here I don't know. Then there was the viral video of a woman from Tennessee being asked about oral sex outside of a bar. Kind of a bro, Girls Gone Wild inspired genre that's emerged on TikTok. Right, the Hawk Tour girl. There's the viral Florida-based father and son duo AJ and Big Justice who do food reviews at Costco. Right, the Costco guy is made up of white men and boys from Florida and New Jersey rating foods in a cartoonishly macho manner. Right, they're not explicitly trafficking MAGA, but they're trafficking in spaces that had been less visible in recent years, rural and suburban enclaves featuring white, heterosexual, male, and even bro talent that was out of vogue in recent history. So we saw all these movies from conservative studios, including the biopic Reagan, The Sound of Hope, a follow-up to The Sound of Freedom, that all did really well at the box office. And then you had Twisters, right, which didn't push any global warming ideology. You just see a white blonde savior played by Glenn Powell emasculate the movie's other main male character, a Latino storm chaser, Harvey. Then Powell happened to produce another piece of Americana, Blue Angels. I saw that documentary. Look at the U.S. Navy's Flight Demo Squadron, and this was the 4th highest grossing documentary of 2024. And he starred with Sweeney in Anyone But You. So we saw a pendulum movement in music, in movies, in podcasts, and even in parts of TV. So when you look at our media landscape with the results of the election, truly surprising, concludes Vox.
That the digital space and the popular support are important, and controlling perceptions is important. However, I want to point out that, the New York Times is still there, Harvard is still there, the administrative state is still there. I think there is a post-election high, but I don't think it's going to last. I think that the messiness of this politics is going to show that there's a limited amount of things you can achieve with populism, right? At some point, you cannot just pressure every single Republican lawmaker and party operative. You have to have your own people. You have to have people who are loyal to you. And that is not the current Republican Party. Now, from the Democratic Party side, from the left-wing perspective, this is sort of good. Turns out the real checks and balances in the American system was internal party fracturing. Maybe the US can't really have a one-party state left or right because too many people defect on their own team all the time. In China, they have to use pretty extreme measures to get the CCP to stick to itself. Challenge of governing a country after one has achieved sort of the populist success. The first step is securing control of the administrative state.
And so the Trump plan, as I understand it right now, normally you get about 2,000 political appointees when you take over a presidential election. Now the plan is to fire up to 50,000 civil servants and replace them with political appointees. So you would expect these political appointees to be more aligned with Donald Trump. On the other hand, you'd have considerable trepidation about their competence.
And then only after you have really the step of properly shrinking it, right? I feel like first you have to have control, then you can maybe shrink it. And I just think that there is, in theory, a good opportunity to do that over the next 4 years. And I would honestly be excited to see it because I think the US government kind of needs a partial reform and reset of its key institutions. Like, all of the regulations gone too far and the ambition's gone out of government. And it's been a very long time since anyone was...
Right. So reckless deregulation will open up room for many disasters. So it's not about deregulation or not deregulation. It needs to be targeted. It needs to be accurate. It doesn't just, you don't just want a slobbering mess of, we're just not going to bother enforcing certain rules anymore, right? It needs to be done with expertise, with intelligence, and competence. And I'm not sure that this Trump administration is putting sufficient value on competence.
Excited to work in government. So maybe there's an opportunity to do that, but it involves the transmutation of popularity into basically legal power and essentially like just having the people who want to do the work for you. Like if you're paying someone a salary to do a job and they're just passively kind of sabotaging your policy agenda, well, that's a big problem, isn't it?
Yep. It is worth, because we're talking about populism, and you started the conversation by talking about there's left-wing populism too, and you mentioned Chavez, et cetera.
I mean, in the United States, AOC I would qualify her as left-wing populism.
Yes, but left-wing populism is about sort of the government doing things for you, where it seems like this populism is, I don't want to say it's libertarian necessarily, but it's like, get wokeness out of our schools, get the trans stuff out of the schools. It's sort of like, it's somewhat like, get this sort of like get out of our spaces, basically. Let us live our life. It's like, let us sort of, not be blind, sort of gaslit or something. It's like a reactionary populism, basically. But it doesn't seem to be asking for handouts in the same way, right?
Well, there's like a few differences here. It's sort of like, in a way, a direct handout is perhaps more politically powerful than getting out of someone's way because they're directly dependent on you.
Yep.
And in the other one, you are protecting them from a plausible danger from the other side or from someone else to meddle in their affairs again. And I think people are more grateful for an existing dependency than they are afraid of, meddling that hasn't yet materialized. I think that politically there's a difference, but the key similarity is that you're trying to build like vast popular appeal. You're trying to build popular appeal for a measure and bring popular opinion as a form of pressure, mostly on elected officials. But even, for example,
I kept having to contact those handling my column and say, wait, I've got an insert. Hold on. Here's two more. And with mainstream picks like Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, other Capitol Hill veterans like Elise Stefanik and Mike Waltz and Kristi Noem for Homeland Security, the president-elect was winning some grudging respect, even as his media detractors took their shots.
I love the experience, I love the competence, and I love the fact that Trump is moving on this decisively.
The common theme through all of them is that Donald Trump is really trying to stack up his second term, and particularly his cabinet, with people that will be yes men.
But then, suddenly, in classic Trumpian fashion, controversy erupted. The 47th president tapped former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard to be the director of national intelligence and Army veteran Pete Hegseth of Fox News to run the Pentagon. More on that shortly. But those nominations were eclipsed by the choice of incendiary Congressman Matt Gaetz, who was himself investigated by the Justice Department over allegations of sleeping with an underage girl, though he was never charged, and has been under investigation by the House Ethics Committee. Even Republican senators sounded unenthusiastic. Here's what Gaetz said at the last two CPAC conferences.
In Congress, I'm often excoriated, smeared, derided for exposing a corrupt system that has been weaponized against we the people. And the media isn't on our side either. The Matt Gaetz chaos agenda. That was the headline from the liberal New Yorker magazine. We either get this government back on our side or we defund and get rid of, abolish the FBI, CDC, ATF, DOJ, every last one of them, if they do not come to heel.
I always thought Matt Gaetz was in the clown car. So I'm surprised he'd be part of the starting lineup.
Gaetz is controversial because of some personal allegations that Biden's Justice Department hung over his head but never prosecuted. We expect the Democrats to treat him like trash and turn his hearing into the Salem witch trials.
He is going to use Gaetz as an instrument of revenge.
He's a serious guy. He doesn't always necessarily show that because he goes for the jugular politically. But it's wrong to dismiss him as just a political firebrand.
Complete and utter horror. Matt Gaetz is incredibly ill-suited for this position.
Matt Gaetz is a lawyer, four-term congressman, longtime ally of Donald Trump, who aggressively helped expose political weaponization at the DOJ of Harris and Biden. So naturally, the pearl-clutching, breathless hysteria on the left has been nonstop.
We now have multiple media melodramas. And remember, Donald Trump wants these nominees to transform, maybe even blow up these agencies. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
It's hard to think about anything else right now in American politics aside from these crazy nominees.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage in Nashville, Tomi Lahren, host of Tomi Lahren is Fearless on Outkick.
Okay, I don't care what she has to say. Let's get back to the thoughtful commentary here from Samo Berger.
Example on companies, like boycotting concrete companies, right? Concrete companies fearing bad PR. And finally, also just sort of social pressure, because no one likes to be unpopular. Even if the public has no direct mechanism to remove you from your position, if they really dislike you, you're going to try to work on your PR, just because it'll be unpleasant to be the head of a university or a school or a federal agency or whatever exposed to that. And you might be closed opportunities in the future because of it. I think this sort of like...
love this comment in the chat. Massive, unthought through deregulation is simply like reducing the total number of medications that you go on without, thoughtful consideration of the consequences. Right? If you're on 10 medications right now, just simply going off 5 of them isn't necessarily in your best interest.
Difference it's this more libertarian strand. Like what I worry about it.
Another good point in the chat from Bob. Isn't this just standard Trump negotiation strategy? He proposes these MAGA radicals, then he will negotiate with the GOP to get somewhere in the middle between the GOP and the MAGA candidates.
It is that it's trying to achieve a vacuum, and I think that if you say, let's say, what would it even mean to get wokeness out of schools? Does that mean like firing 80% of academics? Does this mean that people would be happy to not send their kids to college because there are now fewer colleges? Or does it mean that you fire 80% of quote unquote woke people, and then people who are from the same social class, educated with the same degrees, have this?
Well, the problem is our institutions are dominated by the left and the center left. And so we need a slow march through the institutions. We also need to create our own institutions. We need to fund. There's no peace lobby in Washington, D.C. There's no group that is going to send money to politicians if they advocate for a restrained foreign policy. And so we don't have many nationalist think tanks. We don't have many nationalist NGOs. We don't seem to have much money funding what's in the best interests of Americans.
Same opinions, but now know to shut up about them for about 4 years, get hired in. And sure, maybe, your daughter or son has like a slightly less left-wing college experience and you're a little bit happy about that as a conservative parent, but don't we just end up at the same spot? You would have to fundamentally like shrink the number of people going to college, for example, or you'd have to figure out, hey, what does like
well, men are dropping out of going to college unless it's an elite college, right? They're just going into business or they're going into trade school, right? So they are opting out of an increasingly left-wing feminist college education unless it's elite.
Right-wing university exists. Like, how can someone make a career out of being like, I don't know, like a free market guy, for example, or being a pro tech guy in technology studies or whatever in the university, and that be a good career move, and that'll promote them up, and someday they'll get to teach at Harvard, because then they'll spend their entire intellectual career doing that, right?
This was Curtis Yarvin's critique of Chris Rufo's activism against critical race theory, where he's saying, hey, you can outlaw critical race theory, but people are still going to believe the same thing, they'll just call it something else, and they'll find ways to espouse it. But I wonder if the difference here is, Democrats just lost. They lost the popular vote, and I think there's consensus that wokeness is not working. And so maybe there'll be internal pressure to stop sort of conceding to sort of, maybe Nicole Hannah-Jones has way less power than she used to have, or way less.
I notice a change in news media coverage of Donald Trump and Republicans since the election, right? Prior to the election, the media seemed hysterically anti-Trump. Since the election, they strike me as humbled, chastened, and bending over backwards to be fair. So that's a substantial change. People are removing their pronouns from their social media platforms. Liberals seem to be paying far less attention to news and instead devoting themselves to other things such as family and work. These all seem to be positive developments.
Sort of credibility, and people will say, hey, like even internally on the Democrats, like, we don't need to listen to this. And maybe that will sort of, ooze out.
Well, this election as a means to reform the Democratic Party, I think might just work. But that's very different from what I think people talk about by default. No, I would totally agree with you that within the Democratic Party, I think marginally the faction that supports the most, the deepest push for culture war, I think that faction's been disempowered. I think like the anti-crime, more socially moderate one has some advantages. I don't think that the big government one has been like really disabled within the Democratic Party though. So it's sort of like, imagine like Gavin Newsom, big government, but now it's like this. Now with 50% less crime, it's like, I can't believe it's not butter. This sort of rebranding where it's like, oh, what we really want is like, clean streets and a clean environment.
This would be a winning path back to power for Democrats, right? Tough on crime, clean streets, Democrats.
And, we're going to make America cities like thrive, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if they actually did that in California, that's actually a solid argument for the presidency. It's not clear that's going to happen, but I don't think that the Democratic Party is moving away from managerialism or from the administrative state as the means to implement policy. Like, does that make sense? I'm like evaluating it from this, like, kind of like from the, hey, I want people to leave me alone perspective. And they're like, well, we're not going to leave you alone, but the things we're going to tell you to do are going to be less onerous, right? So see, that's the kind of reform I expect on the Democratic Party side.
Right. Well, it's interesting because and I'm not sure if we've talked about this before, but there's sort of the Noah Smith, Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson, sort of like abundance, leftism movement, which to me kind of seems like conservatism in a way, or at least free market, like what they're, they want to deregulate housing. They want to, what they call supply side liberalism, but basically, deregulation, housing. They want to get rid of sort of laws that prevent us from being able to build. They want to free up sort of the building. I guess they would say they want to, increase state capacity or industrial policy, just like much more effective government, and they want to focus on this, healthcare as opposed to some of the culture stuff because they realize that they're losing on the culture stuff.
I think that's like in a way promising, but I feel that's a very intellectual and coherent response. And then the question is, who is the power base within the Democratic Party that backs this? Like I could see like, say, a pragmatic Gavin Newsom sort of embracing Andrew Yang as his like idealist side, right? And then
so Professor Amy Wax has been speaking this weekend at Jared Taylor's American Renaissance conference, which is a little bit of a surprise, but here are some of the highlights. Amy Wax at American Renaissance confronts the idea that indulging the egalitarian delusion is necessary for social peace. She argues it inevitably devolves into blaming bias, racism, the West, and white people. She lists all the negative consequences of continuing to indulge the anti-racist dogma out of cowardice. She argues that social norms and religious beliefs still give us certain duties towards those who are not endowed with above-average intelligence, but facts are facts. Only the top 20% can be the top 20%. She argues even in academia, there is a failure to think seriously about human limitations for groups and individuals. She recounts one person telling her, "I continue to believe that anyone can be anything." She confronts the argument that acknowledging different levels of IQ among different groups will be demoralizing to those belonging to low IQ groups. Says this is not true. She points out that bell curves for men and women are different, and this does not traumatize her. Averages do not define individuals. She notes if leftists acknowledge inherent discrepancies in group gifts, they may still advocate a luck egalitarianism where society compensates for things such as low intelligence. I remember talking to people after the bell curve who were on the left, and they agreed with the bell curve, and they said this is a strong argument why we need more government intervention to make outcomes more equal. She identifies two kinds of race realism around IQ. Soft race realism acknowledges IQ differences between races, but attributes it mostly to environmental factors, while hard race realism argues it's mostly inherent and genetic. She says she once rejected the label of race realist, though she now embraces it, despite a lack of clarity with its definition. She says the conversion to race realism is a multi-stage process with opposition at every step, like climbing a ziggurat. And who's the also at the American Renaissance Conference, a prominent radio personality who I'm blanking on his name, but I'll find that for you and come back to it.
And like, it may be inviting Noah Smith to write a policy paper, but then as soon as Noah Smith is like inconvenient, I imagine Gavin Newsom like dropping him in an instant. What? Never knew you.
Hey, I could see Dustin Moskovitz, Reid Hoffman. I mean, these are, technocratic.
Okay, yeah.
Increment, utilitarian, sort of pragmatic to some degree. And so I could see them getting.
Yes, Anthony Cumia also spoke at the American Renaissance Conference.
Behind such a day. I think one question I have is, does it have voter appeal?
But Eric, that would be still technology entering politics, just technology entering politics on the Democratic Party side, which arguably was sort of attempted in different ways by, basically by Bill Gates, Eric Schmidt, again, Reid Hoffman, and so on. The Hoffman seems extremely motivated primarily by an anti-Trump agenda rather than a let's make the Democratic Party work agenda.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of Reid's.
Dustin Moskovitz is a good suggestion because we know for a fact that, he has donated huge amounts of money, which is very admirable for something he believes in, even if one disagrees with what he believes in. I think that it's like he has basically, if someone is willing to give a lot of their personal money to reshape society, like I almost think that's legitimate, actually. It's like you're putting, it's skin in the game, right? Like if you have like $20 billion and all you do is tweet, I probably shouldn't take your tweets that seriously. If you have $20 billion and you give $1 billion and create a thing called the Open Philanthropy Foundation, and you hire the smartest nerds you can find to like prevent the AI apocalypse, look, I can respect that. There's no bullshit. I just believe you that you actually think this is extremely good for society. So I don't know. I think that there is something there, but I think someone would have to seize the narrative and say, hey, we lost because the people want cheap electricity, they want abundance, they want clean, safe streets. And on top of that, we can, of course, have all of this classic progressive policies. You want to have a welfare state? That's great. We'll fund it through exports. We'll fund it through cheap energy. We'll just grow enough, right? And in a way, that was kind of the Bill Clinton promise. If you think about it, the modern Democratic Party is way less technocratic, way less pragmatic, way less interested in economic growth than, say, the Bill Clinton era one was.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
But I think we need kind of a tech live player to organize, let's call it the tech left, even though calling it the left almost implies that it's progressive. Let's organize the tech liberals to pursue this agenda and just actually deliver on these goods. Because I think if they delivered on these goods in California, look, the rest of the country would want to be California. The Democratic Party has a state where they have free reign. They should use it. They should make it the most desirable place in the US. And I guarantee you other politicians will then run on, hey, our state should be just like California. Currently, they're running on, our state will never be like California. Thank goodness.
Yeah. If you had to guess what the candidate looks like in 2028 on the left, or the archetype of the candidate, what would that guess be?
Okay, I think AOC with kids is actually an extremely potent political candidate. Here's a vision of the future. I'm just telling you, Eric, what I think could work.
You're the messenger.
Yeah, don't shoot the messenger. So AOC has like 1 or 2 beautiful children. She shows up in happy photo ops. She says how after, the Trump election, she really listened to all those podcasts people recommended. And you should realize that the establishment was out of touch. And that Americans, like, Hispanic Americans and white Americans and everyone, right? What we really need is to have an America where, families can be prosperous again. Working class families can be prosperous. Okay. And then that rhetoric, I think it can just literally do her entire agenda. You could just do, the Green New Deal or whatever after, and no one would stop you. I think people very fundamentally respond to the optics. And I think AOC in the public's perception is almost a single woman. But if the AOC in the public's perception is a married mom, then I think she's conservative enough to win. Okay. I think the first woman who's going to be president in the United States will be a conservative, socially, like personally conservative woman. She'll seem like a family woman. She'll have to push a little bit. So I'm not a stay-at-home mom, but I am a mom. I'm a family woman. My family is the most important thing to me, and I'm here to protect your family. I'm not your HR lady. I'm a concerned mom.
Why do you think that would have more appeal than like a Josh Shapiro or something, or more, centrist?
Well, I think AOC is the most charismatic Democrat, and the second most charismatic Democrat is Gavin Newsom, who's a shark, but you kind of have to run a dark Brandon style campaign. You have to run a like dark Newsom. It's their guy is crazy, but our guy is sharper. Our guy can beat him in debate, and he's going to protect the excellent people doing good work by being absolutely ruthless. And look at him, he's so competent. And again, the optics are just, say what you will, but the photo op of Gavin Newsom's family with the dog is just beautiful, right? The core thing here is that I think Americans want to feel a personal connection with their head of state. And I think that's very normal in all of human history. People have wanted to feel a personal connection with their head of state. I think it makes us feel safe. I think on a subconscious level, all humans are really terrified of government.
Yeah.
And if the king or the czar or the pharaoh is the father of the nation, well, then I don't need to be that scared. This is my dad, right? He's going to protect me on a subconscious level. And, the reason, I don't know, Eric, in terms of pure charisma, not who you agree or who you like, but in terms of pure charisma of the current field of Democratic Party politicians, elected officials, is there anyone who's in the same category as, let's say, AOC? And then maybe Gavin is more like a slick politician. It's not quite charisma, but it's so practiced and so done perfectly. He feels like, a high, like if we ask ChatGPT, generate a California Democratic Party president, what did they look like? I think it would probably generate something close to Gavin Newsom. Like optically, he just looks that way.
Yeah. I don't know if could there be a Trump of the left? Could Mark Cuban or someone like that come out of nowhere and, build an audience? I mean, maybe because the Republicans are...
Well, I think it would have to have a social media following.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And that's why, again, sorry, I hate to bring it back to AOC, but AOC does do the social media game super well. I think behind Donald Trump, second most skilled person at social media.
Yeah, Cuban's not bad, but he's no AOC.
Exactly. But
now, AOC is not a deep thinker. She's not particularly knowledgeable, but yes, she is charismatic.
But maybe he'll get better, right? People can get skills. And I do think, for example, there's this whole generation of, if I have to predict what the next generation of Democratic Party politicians will come, I think it's after the baby boomers all depart. I think that you will see a sudden upswing in millennial social media personalities running for office. I think we might yet come to see the influencer era of congressmen. But I expect that's more like 10 years out, because the gerontocracy in both houses is just very severe. It's still getting slightly older every year, but that can only go on for so long. The current incumbents will just, nature will take its toll.
Yeah. Maybe as a last question, do you think blue cities will now be more empowered to sort of be a bit more conservative or a bit more hardlining now that we shifted a little bit?
I think so. I think some mayors will take the opportunity to end up running their cities in a very different way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything yet covered in this conversation, or maybe as any last points?
I think that we have seen populism emerge as a phenomena in the last decade because traditional media has been bypassed. In fact, this was a phenomena of the internet. It will continue to be transformed by the internet. So minor changes in what happens to TikTok, what happens to X.com, what happens to Facebook and Instagram, what happens to YouTube moderation policies, these will have a disproportionate effect on the success of the populist strategy. The populist strategy is essentially gather a lot of attention first, public attention first, public support second, convert that into offices and positions of power. This is what allows party outsiders across the Western world to enter into politics. It's the same in Italy, Britain, Poland, the United States, and so on.
Same in Ukraine, where the current president comes from an acting background and a comedy background.
And populism is a strategy in this sense, in this narrowly defined sense, where we're not saying this is small government or this is socialism, because each of those, depending on how you frame them, both of them actually have a lot of popular appeal. Like if you look at general opinion polls, you can slightly rephrase how you are in favor.
Okay, let's get some more analysis here from Tim Dillon.
Break them down to the point where they start to lose it and they accept you as some kind of...
He's talking about how you can become famous.
A Christ-like Messiah figure because you've posted 10,000 videos of you eating sausage rolls in your car in a McDonald's parking lot. And they just can't stop watching. People have to hate you now to love you. The Costco guys are a perfect example of it. The goal is to be cringe. The goal is to have people vomit when you post something. They should vomit. They should question their life. The Costco guys were on the Tonight Show. It works, but the vultures and the people that claim to have knowledge of how that all happens is completely untrue. Nobody told the Costco guy that he was going to get famous going double chocolate cookie. Nobody understands why any of it's happening. It's all random. So anybody that you are paying or you're giving a percentage of your money to who claims to be some Svengali, who claims to know, who claims to be a wise seer of truths, nobody knows. You got to hop two on that thing. Boom, famous. It's just what it is. Accept what it is. And I also don't hate the scam. I got scammed fair and square. I lost money fair and square. There's nothing wrong with that. I got beat. There's nothing wrong with getting beat.
All right, New York Times has a hilarious fact check of Bobby Kennedy Jr. Mr. Kennedy has singled out Fruit Loops as an example of a product with too many artificial ingredients, questioning why the Canadian version has fewer than the US version. But he was wrong. The ingredient list is roughly the same, although Canada has natural colorings made from blueberries and carrots, while the US product contains red dye 40, yellow 5, and blue 1, as well as butylated hydroxytoluene, or BHT, a lab-made chemical that is used for freshness, according to the ingredient label. And this is a fact check of how Kennedy got it wrong.
I got beat by some Persian Jews in Beverly Hills. And by the way, that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. You should get beat by Persian Jews in Beverly Hills. That's a good way to get beat. My whole life I wanted to get beat like that. Finally, I got beat at a high level in the top zip code in the country, 90210. I got beat. I sat there like a fool, and they said, we know the secret. And I go, well, I believe you. And I got beat. That's all it is. There's nothing wrong with it. It's all right. You're not going to avoid it. Just know it's happening and try to limit who beats you and how. So there should be nothing more clear in this landscape of the internet that no one knows anything. That should be the golden rule right now. Nobody knows anything. It is a completely random circus that you may or may not plug into or be a part of. But there is no expert that is going to tell you how to be the Rizzler. That just doesn't happen. You're either the Rizzler or you're not. Now, Armie Hammer, good friend of ours, friend of the show, Armie Hammer, is doing a podcast now with his mother. You know, Armie Hammer obviously was a very successful actor, and he's had some problems because, you know, people claimed he was a cannibal or might not have been a cannibal, but he had a fetish, he had a kink. His defense, I think, is that he was having a little fun telling women that he wanted to eat their heart and eat them or drink their blood. Fun, kind of kinky stuff. It's what a guy like Armie Hammer eventually gets into, a guy that looks like Armie Hammer. Sex isn't enough. I think he's had enough sex. He's a hot guy. He was rich. He was famous. He's had enough sex. There's nothing that he's not standing at a bar going, I wonder if any of these women will fuck me. That's over for him. He's going, will any of these women let me eat their kidney? Because that's what I need to come at this point in my life. Now, his claim is that it's all fake, that it's not true, that it's a kink, that he's doing it basically because it gets him off. So we don't want to kink shame him. Of course, we take a stand against cannibalism on the show and always have, except for very specific instances where native cultures, indigenous cultures, practice cannibalism because it's not my business. And that's the new world, by the way. We're heading back to this isolationist 1900s foreign policy of like, it's not, I don't judge the cannibals in the island I can't pronounce the name of. It doesn't matter. But Armie Hammer, who's in our society, who's playing by the rules of our society. So now he's doing a podcast with his mother because he's trying to come back. And can we play some of this? Because it is...
Yeah, he's trying to get heat. So
I root for him. He wants this. Armie wants this. And let's say, and you know, Armie's talking to these Persians too. They're going, we'll help you. Oh, Armie, we'll help you. It's okay. What'd you say? You wanted to eat a woman's liver? Don't worry about it. We'll get you. Armie, it's all the algorithm. You got to get plugged into the... You're a good-looking cannibal. You're doing a podcast with your mother. We got the brand deals. We got the deals, Armie. Put it on the desk. Why don't you drink Celsius water? Drink gulps of Celsius water in between telling your mother you want to eat women. Let's see Armie Hammer here.
For a while. Yes. Because I said, I don't need a pastor. I need a mom.
You're called to be an actor. I'm called to be an evangelist.
Beautiful.
And that is my calling. I brought you into this world. I'm responsible for your well-being. And when I come in your apartment, if you can call it that, and there is a table with Hindu gods and meditation things and demonic pagan gods, I struggle with that. God gave me my two sons as a gift. And you are the only family member out of all of Doug Mobley's relatives that don't believe in the one true God. And I know you will because he's
Here's the problem. Here's the problem with the internet. This is already better than The Sopranos, which was the greatest show that's ever made. So the Sopranos, in my estimation, is the greatest show that's ever made. This podcast clip is already better than The Sopranos. Armie Hammer's mother is a Christian evangelist. She's yelling at him for having Hindu pagan gods on the table of his apartment, which she insults him for having an apartment that is small. She may have missed the news where he lost his entire career and a lot of his money. So Armie Hammer's mother, who's like, looks like, like a mega church Christian pastor, like somebody would hop off at G5 and go to the church and get everybody revved up. Armie Hammer's mother is really struggling with her son living in a small, shitty apartment and worshiping, Ganesh, the elephant. I love Ganesh. That's the elephant, the Hindu elephant. And then there's Vishnu. There's a lot of them. I'm not going to go through them. But we don't have the time, and I don't know any more of them. I know Vishnu, and I know Ganesh. I know Shiva. I know a few. Now, this woman here is haranguing her son for, I guess, because he's converting or trying to appreciate Hindu. This is LA. This is what happens. You pretend to be gay in a movie. You pretend to eat Timothée Chalamet's ass. You get busted for being a cannibal. You deny it. You say, I'm not really a cannibal. You lose your acting opportunities. You lose your money. You move into a small apartment, and you start worshiping Hindu gods. What did his mother think this was? This is what you do. That's actually the actual chart of what happened in his life, and nothing makes more sense than that. Remember when Armie Hammer was selling his car and he was sad about that? He was sad he was selling his car. He's like, well, I guess I'll take 10 grand for it. The guy's got no money. He's got to believe in something. And he probably doesn't want to believe in the Christian thing because that was his mother, and that led him down the road where he wanted to start drinking blood. So he goes, let me give the Hindu. Now, do the Hindus want him? This is a fair question. Do Hindus want Armie Hammer as their newest convert? Do they want him? There's no way. Hindu culture is interesting. I don't know much about it. I know isn't there that temple in Malibu that's really beautiful?
Yeah, the one on, yeah.
That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Do they have services there?
Yeah, I think you can just go.
Should we take Armie Hammer to that beautiful Hindu temple in Malibu?
Sure.
Because I don't know about the services. I know that Christians and Jews and Muslims, but I don't know about the Hindu services. They condemn cannibalism and Hinduism too. Yeah. Now, can we watch a little more of this podcast with Armie Hammer and his mother? Armie, there's a way back, buddy, and you're doing it. You're doing the work. The movies are dead anyway. You're much more interesting as a cannibal with an evangelical Christian mother than you were as just some hot, rich guy. Now, you may disagree with that. You may want to go back to just being some hot, rich, red carpet guy. But I'm telling you right now, this is a lot more fun for the rest of us. Armie, the first years of your life were very fun for you. Now it's fun for us. This is fun for the audience. This is much more fun for the audience. Now, can we just watch this? I don't think you understand how happy I am.
Oh, this one? Yeah.
Please, let's watch it. I mean, this is
him solo. Here we go.
The look in his eyes.
Of filming done. The first day of filming, I showed up on set. I'm so nervous.
Set? What do you mean set?
I think he's back working on some sort of like indie smaller project.
Oh, interesting. Oh, good.
It's a return to Grace arc.
Oh, good. Let's watch it.
Do this. What if I don't know what to do? Like all this stuff. And then the minute Travis, the director, said action the first time, I was like, oh, wait, this is what I love. This is what I love to do. This is what I've done for most of my life. I've said so many times to people that I've been talking to over the last week how grateful I am to just be here and be on set.
By the way, I root for Armie Hammer. I do. I want him back. He was a good actor. I think he was acting to, I don't think he's a real cannibal. I don't think he has it in him, personally. No offense. I think he was acting and going, what if I was a cannibal? I think actors, their inner lives are so dull and boring. They are husks. And if they don't keep getting stimulation from outside of themselves, they retreat into this incredibly dull space where they need to invent things that are interesting. And I think he goes, well, what if I was a cannibal? What if I interfaced with the world as a cannibal? Maybe I'm a cannibal. No, you're just kind of this boring guy, in my estimation. And he probably said some things to the ladies that didn't make them feel super great. And they got upset. Now, I don't know what else he's accused of, but I don't think it was like the R word, right?
No, it was just a lot of sort of like questionable conversations.
Yeah, right. Hey. That's my living is questionable speech. Let's watch a little bit of him and the mother, and then we'll get out of here. But I root for him. I want him to come back. And I think with the new administration and the idea that cancel culture has gone too far, I think people accept Armie Hammer back. I'm throwing it out there. I'm no Long Island medium, or maybe I am, but I'm just going to say I predict Armie Hammer in this climate has an easier time coming back.
Yes.
I believe so.
I remember saying, this guy's really creepy. I remember the response being, how dare you say that about a man of God? Like, oh, okay, I can't say anything. And it just is getting weirder and weirder. At one point, he was on a family trip with us and sexually abused me in Grandma and Grandpa's house.
Yeah, but again, we're thinking, oh my gosh, you're going to my parents' house with these godly people, your youth pastor.
But that's what I'm saying. Maybe God is not enough of a protection.
I know a lot of it is my failure as a mother because I did not protect you from a molester. I take 100%.
Well, this is very heavy now. Now he's talking about being molested, and she's saying, I failed as a mother. I didn't protect you as a molester. And then Tom Arnold comments, this is fucking amazing. Powerful shit. You are so good at podcasts, getting validation from your mom. I'm jealous. She is so cool and attractive. Tom? Was that necessary, that last two words? Tom? She was so cool and attractive. Heart? Tom, they're talking about that he was molested by a youth pastor. Is this the time to Riz his mother? And yes, I say Riz because I'm 17 years old. Everyone, after Trump's election, everyone just got 20 more years. You just set yourself. You're now young again. We're all teenagers again, and it's all fun again. We're all 17 years old. So Tom Arnold is rizzing up Armie Hammer's mom as she learns about her son's molestation. And you know what? In prior times, I would think that's inappropriate. Now I'm thinking about it. It's as good a time as any, Tom. It's as good a time as any to get in there and point out that this woman is.
So what the heck is rizzing up? What does it mean to attract somebody's attention, make them like you in a romantic or sexual way? That's from the Cambridge Dictionary.
Put together. She did do a good job. I don't know how old she is, but however old she is, she did a great job. Let's talk about these cabinet appointments because I might be one of them. I'm thinking, I'm hearing, I don't know. This is being bandied about. I might come on board here. I'm going to, right now, my main goal is to help RFK get a warning label on the Uncrustable because it is kind of one of those things you just put in your mouth and then you can't stop. You don't know what's going on. One of the only good things about Joker 2, by the way, which is now the biggest news story in the world that I told the truth, but now we're in an era of truth telling. It was endless Uncrustables, both the grape and the strawberry. But RFK now is Secretary of Health and Human Services. So he is out there and the FDA and the CDC now fall under his control. And so here are the people that we know. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Attorney General Matt Gaetz. Now, Matt Gaetz might not get confirmed because there are issues with Matt Gaetz. They're saying he hooked up with a minor, the 17-year-old that he might have human trafficked. But here's my thing, folks. Let's be very honest right now. If we're going to say that human trafficking is just a non-starter, we've got to kick everybody out. Everybody.
Yeah, when I was 20 years old, I was dating the boss's daughter. She was 16. And yeah, I'd get all sorts of warnings about, I shouldn't take her to Australia. I shouldn't take her across state lines. But I mean, is that human trafficking?
He's leaving Washington. And by the way, it's only one person he trafficked. Folks, this is not the time to be a prude. This guy trafficked maybe one person. And by the way, trafficking one person, that's not like an operation. That's like something that can happen easily. Do you ever drive through the different states? And then they go, welcome to Connecticut. And you're like, shit, I'm in Connecticut. You didn't even know you're in Connecticut. You just trafficked a minor. You didn't realize it. You don't know. This is easy. Oh, you're in Washington. Now you're in Virginia. Now you're in Washington. It happens very quickly. Very quickly, you're in and out of these states. You may have just trafficked a minor.
I was 20, she was 16, but I did not have sex with that woman. I did not have sex with that woman. I just dated a 16-year-old when I was 20.
Honor you were having sex and doing drugs with, and I'm not for it. It's not good. It's not good if it happened. The Biden-era Justice Department didn't bring a case against him, which is odd. There is an ethics panel investigation coming.
So I go to work one day, and we're working at the boss's home, and I say good morning. He says, "Oh, you're from Australia," and I was so flattered that he knew where I was from just from the merest greeting. He says, "Oh, you should meet my daughter. She wants to go visit Australia." And so 2-3 hours later, when she finally wakes up, she comes wandering out, and a lovely, lovely girl. Take her to see Crocodile Dundee and Lean on Me. And I went to my first rock concert. We saw In Excess in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then she started dating a guy who she's married to now, still married to. Had kids, long, stable relationship. But I remember one time I was working in construction, landscaping in particular, and she was into punk rock, and she came out with one of her punk rock friends, a male friend who had like big, puffy, pink hair. And she was going to introduce me to him, but then all the construction workers started laughing at him, and they like turned around and went back inside. So those damn construction workers, they may have cost me my chance at the love of my life.
Out that's probably not ideal, but here's what we're saying. The minor and the drugs, not great, but the trafficking's easy to do. I have driven to Connecticut for soup. It is very easy to cross state lines. That's all I'm saying. Yes, the minor and the drugs is not ideal. I've said that now 7 times. My point is the trafficking. All right, let's move on to Pete.
Okay, pretty good stuff there from Tim Dillon. All right, what's going on with Middle East policy under Donald Trump?
Thank you, Steve. There really are 3 moments for me that define President Biden's Middle East. One was in the summer of 2021, the fist bump with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. That was really the nail in the coffin, for lack of a better metaphor, to something that Randa picked up on, of the values-forward foreign policy that President Biden announced when he traveled to the State Department 3 weeks after his inauguration and said, America is back. We're going to put our values and make them part of our administration. Of course, that went out the window in May of 2021 when he had to call Abdel Fattah Sisi a number of times to manage the conflict between Israel and Hamas during that brief conflict, and subsequently gave the Egyptian president a pass. But the fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman, who he had declared beyond the pale and persona non grata at the White House, was, I think, a defining moment and a defining contradiction in American foreign policy writ large. I don't think any other president would have been able to manage kind of bridging those two issues, the strategic imperative of the free flow of energy resources and the desire to center American values in U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East. The second defining moment for me was President Biden's visit to Israel in October 2023. Had I been sitting next to the president, I would have said to him, Mr. President, if you feel that it's necessary for you to go, then you should go. You are the president of the United States. But I would have said to him, at the same time, you realize there's going to be a disconnect between what you think you're accomplishing there and what the Israelis and how the Israelis will interpret your presence there. They will interpret your presence as a green light to pursue their military operations as they see fit, regardless of what your wishes are, because they define this conflict in existential terms. They may be on grounds to define this conflict in existential terms, but you will have no influence over the Israelis, and it is going to harm the U.S. strategic position and even you politically. I said that at the moment. I'm not looking at this retrospectively. There weren't enough people around who understood Israel, and I'm not claiming to be a big Israel expert, but having spent some time there, it was clear what was going to happen. And then the third moment really has nothing to do with the Middle East. It has to do with his one presidential debate with Donald Trump, in which he looked so enfeebled and so weak that it signaled to actors throughout the region that there's really no one home in the White House, that they could pursue their interests as they see fit. There are no guardrails. The United States did not have a president who was able to or even inclined to stand up to them because he was so obviously enfeebled. And we saw immediately thereafter Israelis increase the tempo of their operations once again. The Iranians increasing their efforts throughout the region. And everybody has suffered for it, in particular Palestinians and Lebanese, but I think that was a defining moment as well, although it really had nothing whatsoever to do with the Middle East. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Corey Lewandowski, longtime Trump aide, getting interviewed here by Howard Kurtz.
Joining us now from New Hampshire, Corey Lewandowski, a senior advisor to the Trump campaign and Donald Trump's first campaign manager in 2016. Corey, when you look at the media coverage just since the election, is the press giving the president-elect a chance after his clear mandate and winning the popular vote, or largely slipping back into the role of opposition party?
Howie, I believe that most of the mainstream media wants to continue to denigrate Donald Trump, his picks, his nominees, saying that these people are unfit, not giving him the credit that he is due.
This guy supposedly had an affair with Kristi Noem, the South Dakota governor who's been nominated to be the head of Department of Homeland Security. One reason he was fired as Trump's first campaign manager is that so many female reporters complained that he was hitting on them, including that tiny reporter for NBC who's Katie Tour. She wrote about Corey in her memoir.
For not only winning 312 electoral votes, but obviously winning the Electoral College, helping flip the U.S. Senate from Democrat to Republican with his victories in Pennsylvania, Ohio, obviously Montana. And so when you look at that, Donald Trump is coming back to Washington, D.C. with the mandate. And if this were on the other side, if this were Vice President Harris coming with these kind of numbers, they'd be lauding her as running the greatest campaign this nation's ever seen.
Very few people are saying that now. Now, Trump said again and again that he would carry out mass deportations of illegal immigrants, that he would shake up the government, that he would impose high tariffs. And now I see some journalists and pundits saying, holy cow, is he really going to do this? As if the campaign promises were just empty rhetoric.
Oh, Howie, the campaign promises of making America safe again and making America wealthy again and making America safe again, are absolutely the truth. When you look at the border czar, Tom Homan, someone who is a no games kind of guy, he has been very, very clear. He has a mandate under Donald Trump's administration to close the border, first to finish that border wall. And then if you're in this country illegally, you're one of the 13,099 murderers who've been let into this country, you better have eyes in the back of your head because Tom is coming for you. He's got 20,000 sworn officers who are going to make sure that we are ridding ourselves from the heinous crimes and criminals that are taking place in this country. We look at the Laken Riley event that's taking place right now.
The trial,
and
yeah.
the story that you're hearing coming from that court case is just devastating to every parent, everyone who has a loved one who's been lost, and we will never allow that to happen again. Tom Homan is going to make sure that this country gets safe again.
Well, the biggest uproar in the media, as you know, has been over Matt Gaetz, not just because of the sex trafficking investigation that led to no charges, but because he only practiced law for a couple of years. And it's not just the liberals. The New York Post says he's nuts. Wall Street Journal, National Review say he's a terrible choice. Did that choice surprise you?
Howie, let me say this. We have seen the weaponization of the Justice Department for the last 4 years. And if Matt Gaetz can go into the Justice Department and put the blindfold back on Lady Justice, which is what it should be, then this country is going to be better for it. Now, if the U.S. Senate does not want to confirm Matt Gaetz, then they will be held account for that. And what I mean by that, Howie, is Donald Trump has nominated his choice for the Attorney General. And we're going to use every lever of power, all the political influence that we have, to make sure that Matt Gaetz has a fair hearing. And then those U.S. senators will be on the record to their constituents saying why the President of the United States should not have the right to have his own choice for Attorney General. Remember, Eric Holder, who was held in contempt of Congress, was Barack Obama's quote-unquote wingman. And so Donald Trump should be entitled to his own cabinet as well.
Well, is there a possibility that if he can't get enough votes, that the president-elect will install Gaetz through a recess appointment, even though your detractors say that violates the Constitution?
Look, I believe that's a Senate protocol issue where Senate Majority Leader Thune would have to go into recess and make those appointments. I know that conversation has been had in the sense of Senator Thune, when he was running for Majority Leader, said he was open to Senate appointments during a recess process. I haven't spoken to Senator Thune about that, but I can tell you this. I have had the chance to speak with former Congressman and designee Gaetz. I know that we are all in as a team for him and full court press ahead and holding senators accountable, particularly with Elon Musk resources and Donald Trump's political capital that we will use to make sure every Trump nominee gets through.
Well, Elon Musk has plenty of resources. My former Fox colleague, Pete Hegseth, highly decorated Afghanistan and Iraq War veteran, combat veteran, is drawing media criticism because he's never run a large organization, let alone a massive Pentagon bureaucracy with soldiers around the world. Moved too far left.
We can all agree that the fascination with identity politics on the part of some people in the Democratic Party was a giant mistake.
Will Democrats learn from their mistakes from the last time he was president and not respond by this race to the left on every identity issue?
Carville seems less depressed. Caroline Downey, are media liberals, at least those who haven't openly joined the resistance, finally admitting that the left wing of the Democratic Party is too wrapped up with pronouns and political correctness and can't connect with a lot of average voters?
They're certainly having some mea culpas, Howie, because they're realizing that this election, the American people were at the kitchen table dealing with inflation, crime, migrants overwhelming their communities like Springfield.
Okay, there's a podcast, Hacks on Tap, with Mike Murphy, a Never Trump Republican. Here's the first speaker, also David Axelrod and John Heilman, a MSNBC contributor and left-wing journalist. I think this is Mike Murphy.
Generation, but only in the short term. It's grim. I mean, I'm a right-wing nut Republican. I'm even for some of the policy stuff, but I'm not a big Trump fan. I haven't been since 1993 when I first bumped into him in New Jersey and I was working for the governor. As far as what's going on now, it's going to be a bumpy ride for a while, but this country is strong, and you get another shot in 767 days.
Maybe. Yeah.
No,
well,
I think so. But yeah.
But all right, you start with what just happened. We'll give the reassurance at the end. Yeah. But what just happened? Mm-hmm. Well, this is what's been different since Saturday is what's happened since we last got together on Saturday.
All right, so this is John Heilman.
Saturday that Donald Trump was likely to win the popular vote. I don't think I had really spent enough time with the numbers at that point to appreciate the inroads that he's made with non-white voters. I think there was some question about that. At that point, people were saying, yeah, he did well with Hispanics, but didn't really gain much with African Americans. That turned out to be wrong. He didn't do as well with African Americans as he did with Hispanics, with Latinos. But if you look at the Latino number, the African American number, the Asian American number, it's not an overstatement to say that at least for this election, and the question of whether this is a realigning fact that changes our politics for years to come or not is still to play for. But I did credit him on Real Time on Friday night when I said that Mike said on our show the other day, we should stop calling Hispanic Americans. We should stop calling them that. We should start calling them Americans. And I think there's some truth to that.
Fundamentally, Trump did the best in the marketplace of votes of any Republican in 20 years. He absolutely broke the meter with Latinos, and he broke the meter with young voters under 29. So big macro thing. And I would say if there's one lesson to be painfully learned here, is that those of us who look at elections, particularly in the media, tend to look at it through the postmodern mainspring of so much, which is identity. All deportation, Latinos should vote against that because, however, Latino voters define themselves as Americans and feel the same economic pain. So we tend to lump people together into what group they belong to, which is often how the Democratic Party has looked at elections. That formula no longer works.
The Democratic Party is that we approach working class voters.
This is David Axelrod.
Oftentimes, like we are anthropologists and missionaries, and we're here to help you become more like us. And we don't listen very well, and we don't understand cultural. We don't honor cultural differences. And I think that there's a certain arrogance that's happened. You know, the only group in this campaign in which Kamala Harris did better than Joe Biden was among college-educated white voters. That's the only group among all of the demographic groupings. Lost ground among many others, and as you point out, among some, among Hispanics, among Asian voters, particularly so. There aren't.
The incentives within a Democratic primary are not aligned with the incentives to go win these votes away from the populist Republicans. And that is the battle now. It's going to be the mathematicians versus the priests in the Democratic Party. The mathematicians are going to say, we can't get arrested by anybody who's a white working class voter, particularly males. And we can't get arrested with young males. And the priests are going to say, yeah, because we're doing all this moderate shit, we ought to go to the real progressive agenda and go after the corporate overlords and the rich guys like these two, make them pay their fair share, et cetera, et cetera. And that battle is going to rage on for a while here. But it was a clear message. The problem is, in politics, in the internal world, this is true of both parties, people are good at taking any outcome and saying, well, that proves my point. And the permanent argument continues. So I, as a Trump-hating right-wing nut, am actually rooting for the Democrats. I'm a mathematician. I hope that
the extent to which identity politics, wokeness, and so on is what caused Harris's loss.
Yes.
And there are a lot of discussion like that. At the same time, on this show and other shows like this, people pointed out correctly that Kamala Harris did not play identity politics. She rarely talked about that. This was
but the subtext was there.
But it was not, she did not tout her that she was would have been the first female of color president. She didn't make that explicit, not like Hillary Clinton. She did not make that an explicit part of her appeal. So just what role do you think that played?
Actually believes that working people have been screwed for the last 4 decades by the changes that have happened in the economy. And I just, between automation and globalization, the financial crisis, the fallout from the pandemic, I think that middle-class people feel like they've been rocked. And you look at sort of how wages have grown relative to productivity over the last 40 years, there's a pretty good case for that. So, we can haggle over solutions, but that's a real thing. So when Joe Biden goes out and argues that, Bidenomics works, and when they have video of Kamala Harris saying Bidenomics works, it just says to people, they have no idea what's going on out here. And,
Well, I'd say further than that, just to put a fine point on this. You had Kamala Harris ending her campaign. Her big speeches, she's on the Washington Mall, on the Ellipse.
Yeah, where she should have been.
The White House right behind her.
Yeah.
Government employees pouring in from Northern Virginia to fill out the crowd. And she spends the last 2 weeks of the campaign, and I understand why they did this, but campaigning with Liz Cheney. And look at the breadth of our coalition. We go all the way from Liz Cheney to Liz Warren and all of that, democracy. And most people in the country are like, democracy has these institutions you're campaigning in front of. We hate that institution. We don't like politics. We don't like Washington. We don't like reminders of Washington. We don't think these institutions have served us well. And you're talking about all this inside.
Well, I said the night that they announced that they were doing her final speech on the Washington Mall that I wish she were doing it at a suburban mall, because the topic should have been sort of how the struggles people have in their lives.
They should have done it.
Point. And I want you, John Heilman, as a guy who is not that much younger than us, but is all tatted up and believes that he is. I want you to talk about. I want you to talk about.
He isn't, but his stylist is.
I'm a 12-year-old stylist. What's the question?
My question is, talk about the Trump campaign and how they used social media, how they used podcasts, how they used the means of communicating in the media in which young people get information now.
Well, I'll go back first just to say this about 2016, because you could see this then. It's hard to think of Trump this way because, one doesn't want to acknowledge, you often call him like a feral genius.
Feral genius, yes.
In 2016.
He just heard the genius part.
I'm very stable genius. In 2016, one of the most remarkable things about that campaign was Donald Trump was the candidate of the future in the sense that he was the candidate of Twitter. And Twitter was the dominant social media platform in 2016. And you had Hillary Clinton, who was, the echoes of this are so loud in this campaign. Hillary Clinton, who would not do things like go on Howard Stern. Howard Stern, who was for her, said he was for her, was anti-Trump. She was too cautious. She would go on Howard Stern. And Trump would do anything anybody asked him to do. He would do local radio, he would go on a liberal station, a conservative station, he'd do cable, he'd call in. He made himself available. He understood that in what was then a fragmented media environment, that ubiquity mattered more than anything else. You just had to be everywhere. And Trump became the most accessible presidential candidate I've ever seen. A strategy that Pete Buttigieg, for instance, tried to adopt when he ran in 2020. And now you fast forward to this race. Again, Trump, everybody focused on the Joe Rogan thing, 46 million YouTube viewers and God knows how many millions of people on the podcast just listening to the audio of that. But Trump was for months going on podcasts you've never heard of with some of them very MAGA, some of them not very MAGA. Theo Vaughn, someone who is not super MAGA, but there's Donald Trump out there talking about cocaine with Theo Vaughn. This went on for months, where he was out there below the radar. Again, I think you don't ever associate with Donald Trump, but he was kind of below the mainstream media's radar, was out there pounding these channels that have extraordinarily large, for people we've never heard of, and extraordinarily loyal audiences. And there's at least one person in the audience here who knows something about this, who I've talked about this at some length with, who said to me one day, like, there's almost no one who can get a large numbers of people to listen to stay tuned into something. We have people constantly, apart from the fact that the media landscape is fragmented, our attention is fragmented.
Yeah.
These podcasters you've never heard of have people who listen to them for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they listen intently to every single show. And that is how Donald Trump found this bond with a lot of voters, in addition to cultural affinity and other things, just persistence and ubiquity.
Yeah. Well, our 3 million listeners certainly understand.
Yeah, but they only listen to 35 seconds. As soon as Murphy makes a Milton Berle joke, they switch off.
We invented podcasting and it got away from us. If you're a historian, this is actually interesting. Presidential campaigns are often where the next breakthrough media technology occurs. You go back to the Civil War, Lincoln, that was the first time the federal government had the telegraph, which meant for the first time Washington could know as much about what was happening locally as the local government. And that began a 150-year trend of power moving to the feds. Then you had newspapers. They're pretty effective. You can start the Spanish-American War with a few good pictures.
Newspapers?
They once were important.
Newspaper.
Then FDR and radio. He would have been a dead duck on television, but it became a unifying force. You could talk to the whole country at once with no filter. Was the first super direct communication, no newspaper publisher in the way. Then Jack Kennedy, good hair and makeup, won a debate against the then perceived to be frontrunner, Richard Nixon. Then the internet with Barack Obama was able to organize electronically for free on the internet and raise a lot of democratized money. We had some of that in McCain 2000, but the tech wasn't ready to keep up with the appetite to give us small dollars. Now we're seeing the rise of kind of Gen 2 internet, which is audio programming and video programming that you don't need a TV network. You don't need money for advertising to distribute. So we created these titans of podcasting.
What you do need is to be able, a message, but you need to be able to perform. You need to present yourself 100%. As unscripted 100%. And authentic. And as George Burns once said, all you need in show business to succeed is authenticity. And if you can fake
the perfect candidate for the kind of campaign that he runs, right? Yeah. And he's the kind of candidate who, as we all said, in the last 2 weeks of this race, if you had said, what is that guy trying to do while he's trying to give a blowjob to that microphone stand, you would have said, he's trying to lose the election. He's obviously trying to lose the election. And yet, I don't think, not only do I think that didn't hurt him, I think his behavior is so on brand and reinforces everything that he's been building towards, that it actually helps him when he acts in these ways that we think are so
That said, don't try that.
Yeah, don't try that. Yeah. It's the perfect.
Mike, we don't have a mic stand up here. Don't worry.
They wouldn't let us have one.
It's the perfect rage scream against the system, and his authenticity is his coarseness.
Well, his willingness to do things that are absolutely offensive to people who eat with a fork and knife.
Shamelessness is a great virtue in American politics.
But I shouldn't say that, because I actually don't want to mischaracterize the people's format. But I think there are a lot of people who hear politicians speak in finely manicured, familiar political phrases, and they tune it out, and they say, "Uh-oh, I thought something was going on here in the middle."
Yeah, I was serving
And they say,
subpoena, you're wanted. Yeah.
You ready to turn to what's going to happen next?
Yes, I was going to turn to what's going to happen next.
Or what's going on now?
Well, I mean, the thing is, we've gotten some clues from Trump, right? He's got some personnel decisions that he's made. He appointed his campaign manager, Susie
I got
Wiles.
Amtrak.
Stephen Miller, Uber Alles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at my bookmarks on the platform X. Okay, here's a go.
Hi, I didn't know this place supported genocide, so I'm gonna head out. Have a great night. You guys.
I cannot believe that just happened to me. I was actually shaking as I was leaving that class. So basically, I signed up for a self-defense class, a women's self-defense class. So, you know, it's very important as women to know how to defend ourselves. So basically, I'm super excited, waiting for this class all week. I even talked to them. I even got permission to, like, film a blog, whatever. When I get there, the class is starting. It's a male that's leading it. I don't mind, but, like, whatever. The first instructor is a woman, and she's like, the founder of this class or this style of self-defense is Israeli. My heart fucking dropped when I heard those words.
Poor dear.
I was on your show last Monday, same time practically. I came off, there was a fantastic response from the public. I was really, my heart was warmed by the support and you know, outreach that I received from those that either didn't know what had been going on in Telford for decades. You know, up to 1,000 girls had been reported to have been abused by grooming gangs since the 1980s, or those that had no idea that it could potentially still be going on, and the scale of police, council and social services failings. I went back home, I went back to Telford, and the next day around lunchtime, 2 police officers banged on my door demanding that I speak to them about my interview.
Really? So the police who have done nothing for the entire third millennium to date suddenly were roused to activity by you going on television.
Yeah, they told me that they had gone round to all of the addresses they had on file for me. They had gone to my previous home addresses, the different accommodations that I'd stayed at looking for me, and eventually they located me. You know, they hunted me down, they tracked me, banged on my door. You know, not too different to when they're knocking on the door of a perpetrator, of a potential criminal. I was on FaceTime to my friend at the time, who said to me afterwards, I genuinely thought you were going to get arrested from the way that they were talking to you. They told me that, quote unquote, when you go on GB News and talk about grooming gangs in Telford, it's our duty to follow up with you.
That's not actually true, is it?
No.
So the police are, among other things, lying to you.
It's funny, I said to them at the time, it was funny that they did absolutely nothing to bring my accusers to justice, but when I went on national TV, my abusers to justice, but when I went on national TV and talked about the industrial scale of their failings and their inaction in bringing to justice the perpetrators of vile rape, grooming, sexual assault and child sex crimes in Telford, that they are suddenly spurred into action to come and knock on my door and intimidate me into silence.
It's pretty pathetic, these big butch coppers being so insecure that you going on TV and criticising them can drive them into action that they otherwise haven't taken for decades. Do you know who actually ordered up this, I guess raid is the word for it?
I have absolutely no idea. I know that it was two police officers from the CSE team that knocked on my door. They said they had been working for the force for a year and 6 months respectively, and they were, quote unquote, trying to make a difference. I don't know what difference they were making by going after a victim rather than the perpetrators, those that have been systematically raping, abusing, grooming and passing girls round, like, you know, like
well
for decades.
Yeah, good questions there. All right, Ben Domenech.
The former leader in Mexico to his apprentice, Claudia Sheinbaum, who's now in charge. And we can no longer trust the Mexican government when it comes to any of these things. We need to have a much more aggressive approach to the border, a more aggressive approach that includes going after cartels, going after their money, and when it comes to enforcing our laws, not accepting anything that they say from Mexico on face value. We simply have learned at this point that we cannot trust them. Now, we've gone from...
Okay,
Kratz,
Ben Jones.
what are you going to do for the next 2 years? How
Therapy?
do you regroup?
Therapy. We're all going to therapy. I don't know why are we here? There's nothing. If you're a Democrat, all we can say is we hope that Susie decides that she's going to take a long vacation, that they hire some terrible people and make some mistakes to give us a chance. Right now, they have everything. They got the Supreme Court, they got the Electoral College, they got the House, they got the Senate, they got the popular vote, and we're just sitting here with the dunce cap on. Last week, we thought we were the smartest people in the world. We thought Donald Trump was an idiot. We thought his campaign made no sense, and it turned out they were smarter than us. And we don't have anything to say to you. I can sit here and pretend I know something. Here's what I know. Everybody I know is miserable. Everybody's on these Zoom calls. Nobody's got any good ideas, and it's going to take us a while to figure this out. I'm not good at coming in here and faking and pretending no, we got whooped.
Hey, man, you're gonna go to the spa. You need a massage and a cucumber water.
I agree. And a cookie.
Cookie.
That's right.
All right.
Okay, Steve Saylor.
This century has been to assume that private life facts, what we see with our lying eyes, and public life facts, what the scientific data tell us, are essentially one and the same. There's only one reality out there. We don't live in some kind of Gnostic universe in which there's a false reality of mundane cause and effect, and a horrifying true reality in which unnoticeable oppression determines all fates. In contrast, most commentators assume that the issues of daily life, such as deciding where to live, are of a lesser, more sublunary realm than the high public issues, such as the sanctity of the demands of Black Lives Matter. So the unfortunate facts that they imprudently observe when making real estate choices for their families about safe neighborhoods and good schools couldn't possibly have any relevance to the great topics of the day that they discuss in media. Only vulgar lowbrows would confuse these two vastly different domains of being.
Right.
In truth, you don't need unfalsifiable dogmas like systemic racism to explain why, say, blacks on average are relatively better at playing cornerback than at playing center in the NFL. Biological and cultural differences explain these and countless other patterns. Indeed, trying to figure out how nature and nurture intertwine in modern America is one of the great challenges of the examined life. Public intellectuals should try it. It's fun. When it comes to human behavior, there mostly aren't systematic differences between what your lying eyes tell you and what the science says. Instead, there's a continuum between anecdote, anecdata, and data. For instance, if you can recall several examples
let's bring
suggesting a
Kip
pattern,
back to the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, buddy, I hope you're doing good this Sunday morning.
Very much so.
You were touching earlier on some of the things that I think exemplifies the total disconnect from the people and our institutions right now. You know, you were talking about the universities, you know, how the professors are so dogmatic and all pointed one way politically. And you know how ultra liberal those public school teachers got somehow in the last generation. And then you got Joy Reid going on TV here recently, and she's encouraging family members to shun, supporters of the other party, because after all, they're voting against, women's rights and all this other stuff. So you can see they're doubling down. And you've got the, virtually all of the corporations are on, not only that, the sports, everything that revolves around corporate money, it has all seemingly signed onto this stuff. And then, we've already talked about before, the Hollywood and the music and the media, they all parrot the same message. Ivermectin bad, vaccine safe and effective, hydrochloroquine bad, Wuhan wet market is where everything came from. The Biden laptop, this total disconnect. What would be your prescription to fix the institutions, Luke? Because you can see it's everywhere. It's in all of them, this rot, this cancer.
Oh, good question. So one movement towards fixing this problem is developing alternative institutions. So Elon Musk taking over Twitter, the rise of Rumble and Odyssey and other platforms in social media for free speech. Then I'd like to see the rise of nationalist think tanks, so that intellectuals who think in terms of America first can have jobs and can have platforms where they can publish papers and books detailing the intellectual case for America first. I'd like to see more America first NGOs, non-governmental organizations, so that we don't have so much money in politics that incentivizes politicians to unnecessary American intervention overseas. Instead, I'd love to see a more highly funded restrainer movement, so that politicians can get funding if they commit to a restrained foreign policy rather than highly interventionist foreign policy. And we need ways of picking out, highly intelligent people at an early age. So we spend so much money on the less gifted. I would like to see us spend at least as much money on the gifted as opposed to the less gifted. So right now we spend 10, 20 times as much money trying to educate those with below average IQs. I'd love to see at least an evening of those funds, so that we spend more and more money selecting the highly intelligent and putting them on a path where they can most benefit society and where they can shine. So those are just a few ideas off the top of my head. So all of those are primarily, I guess, lacking direct attack on the institutions in place. So just off the top of my head, building up alternative institutions.
Right. And, they always claim that we're the fascist. They use all the totalitarian tactics, but they accuse us of being the fascists. How would a fascist regime fix the problem with wrong-thinking professors? Where you and I see we need it to be, okay, if not 50-50, geez, 70-30, 75-25. How would a true fascist regime fix that amongst the public school teachers and the professors and the media? How would they fix it?
Well, I think they would recognize that people respond to incentives. So once you start firing people and forcing the hiring of people, then everyone else will get the message, right? People tend to be fairly conformist. So you start taking out the leading left-wing voices. And I'm not advocating this. I'm just saying if a fascist regime, authoritarian regime was doing this, what they do is they'd start forcing out leading left-wing voices and forcing in leading pro-fascist voices.
Mm-hmm. Something I've heard, and it comes up more frequently, I would say, in more anti-Jewish circles, which, let's face it, that stuff's easy to find on the internet. I'm not even looking for it, and you're dropping into one. And I noticed that a lot of those types of people will claim that there's no waspy elites left or any legitimate force of religion left to stem this tide. And to that point, I do get a vision in my head of those Catholic urban ministers with the rainbow shit, rags around their neck and stuff. It's sickening. But is there any truth to that? You think that at one time there was a force of waspy elites and there was a force of a religious core that would have stand up against all this, what would you call it, polymorphic perversion, on every front, trying to degenerate the young people?
Yes, America used to be a more religious country, but let's face it, much of the enthusiasm for Donald Trump and the new right comes from completely secular sources. So it doesn't mean that America needs to become more seriously religious, for the right to have more significant power. So the WASP elite lost power sometime between 1920 and 1960, but there was a WASP elite at the top of the United States social pecking order till approximately the 1950s. Religion has significantly decreased in importance to Americans over the last 20 years. And I'm not sure that there's going to be any turnaround to that trajectory anytime soon.
I've also heard the idea kicked around from normal people that something about like whatever the liberal project was, it fulfilled its mission the day Obama was elected. And if it didn't fulfill its mission then, it fulfilled its mission the day Obama accepted queers. So, and that ever since that time, they went a little crazy. I mean, would you confirm or deny? Do you think
I would deny that. There's no fulfilling the liberal mission. It is an ever expanding, ever on the prowl movement to remove what it sees as bigotry and ignorance from the masses. So there's no end to the liberal left mission to educate and to change and to transform the masses. So it's like a holy mission, just like when you have religious revivals and they want to turn people back to God, back to Jesus, back to religion. Well, modern secular liberal leftism is a secularized version of Reformed Christianity. It's a secularized version of Protestantism. It wants a transformation of the heart and a new orientation towards ever increasing enlightenment and civil rights from their perspective.
Yeah, but from what you're describing there, the first part of what you were saying almost sounded like a host-parasite relationship, because let's say if they get people around, let's say like a bunch of rabbis or whatever, that can sit around and justify this is the new evil and this is the new evil and this is the new evil. It never ends. It's like one of those Ouroboros things eating itself, right? Or tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, I think this is true of every ideological movement. I don't think any of them say, okay, we've cured polio, let's give up. It's what Dennis Prager calls March of Dimes syndrome. So after March of Dimes was started up to cure polio, there was a vaccine for polio found, discovered, and transmitted in the 1950s. You would think it would then go out of business. But they didn't go out of business. They just found new ways of formulating their mission. I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. The Seventh-day Adventist movement began from a preacher named William Miller, who said that Jesus was returning to earth on Yom Kippur 1844. When that didn't happen, did the movement completely disband and people say, oh, I was wrong? No, they just reinterpreted the movement that, oh, Jesus moved in the heavenly sanctuary from the holy to the most holy place, and now we need to keep the Sabbath and follow these other laws to hasten the soon coming of Jesus. So I don't think any ideology or any religious or secular transformational movement ever reaches a conclusion where they then rest on their laurels. Now, conservatism is less of an ideology than a reflex often against the left's evangelical mission. But it's hard to think of any passionate movement that is content to rest on its laurels. Can you think of any?
No. I was just going to say, you got my mind. Gosh, I like to be perfectly able to listen to you. And you started talking about Seventh-day Adventists. And my mind went back to the fact that the first job when I got out of the Marines was collecting bills from broke son of a bitches that had visited Seventh-day Adventist hospitals. It's called the Sunbelt Adventist Health System.
Yeah.
And my mind started thinking about the day the manager started scolding me there because I was accepting too many $5 and $10 arrangements. He's like, you should be able to get $100 from these people. They owe like these huge bills. And I'm like, hey, they give compelling stories. I tell them, You pay the $5, you pay the $10. The day you stop paying it, somebody a lot meaner than me is going to call back, and they're going to demand a whole lot more. So what we lacked in average debt size, we made up for them. That I basically told them, this is your last chance. The next guy that calls you is going to be from the lawyer's side of our collection agency, and you're not even going to want to deal with him. So anyway, sorry for that digression. I was going to also say that, have you ever had anything called a Little Debbie snack cake? Do you even know what those are?
No, I have no idea.
Okay, well, they're made in College Dale, Appleton area, and that's one of those little hotbeds of Seventh-day Adventist people. So just another little digression there.
Hang on, I had a thought. So I think that after people meet their immediate physical needs, their next strongest need is to feel important and high status. And so if you're an Orthodox Jew, a committed Orthodox Jew, you get your status and feeling of importance from fulfilling God's commandments and bringing other Jews to fulfilling that mission. And so it never stops, right? No matter how observant you get or how successful you are bringing other Jews to observe Torah, it never stops. And I grew up the son of an evangelical Christian theologian, and his mission to bring people to Jesus, it just never stops. And there were about 2 years in my life where I liked to flirt with Marxism, and I tried, partly as a performance and partly as a genuine disposition. I tried to understand things from a Marxist perspective, and it was quite intoxicating. And so I can't imagine from stepping back into that self of mine when I was 20 and 21 years of age, I can't imagine stepping back into that self and thinking, oh, would I ever be satisfied? Would we ever achieve enough justice? No. So people get a sense of importance, meaning, and purpose out of their particular hero system, and it's quite rare that any hero system says, okay, that's enough, move on. But on the other hand, I'm then thinking about why I do my shows. So I started out doing these shows in 2015. I found a Jewish woman who was happy to talk about Torah and alt-right politics. And so that was kind of a major theme of this show into 2018. Then there were tremendous speech restrictions put on by YouTube and social media at the end of 2018. So I needed to shift the conversation on the show towards something more socially acceptable. And so now, like, why the heck do I do these shows? And it's because I think I've got a contribution to make between the mainstream narratives that are put out by the New York Times and other media and academics, and my own life experience, and trying to reconcile those two things and understand why they diverge. And so I found a purpose for being. I found that I have something to contribute in that niche. And yeah. So yeah, people are looking for a feeling of importance. Like that's the feeling of importance that I get. I feel like I'm contributing something. Go ahead.
And you are, and like you were kind of hinting at, Luke at 28 couldn't put the same kind of show together that Luke at 58 can do. There's a level of experience and whatever that you've had to draw on, that some of it was Judaism, some of it was let's say when you dipped your toe into Marxism or whatever, and it's the whole totality of that gives you your experience. They say, who is the master that makes the grass green? And the answer to that, Zen Koan, is, of course, that you're the great master that makes the grass green, because there's a yoga there. Yoga just means two things hitched together. So there's a yoga between you and the universe, and that, that manifest, that's what manifests itself in the Luke Ford experience, that gives you something to draw from today as we talk. So yeah, that's all cool stuff. I was going to say we had a little bit of information to draw from on the election. We kind of had the totals come in, and I think that you were the one that told me we got 70. Trump again got 75 million, same as last election, but that she had got only 72 million, where Biden had got 81. And I was just wondering if you thought that the difference was that she was a 9 million worse vote candidate, because Trump got the same, really not a lot to talk there, not a lot to talk about there, because I think maybe the media scared away 5 million and circumstances within the economy and everywhere else brought back another 5 million, so he was left with a wash. But yet on their end, that 9 million drop, would you say a lot of that was maybe special conditions that were allowed during the COVID time that allowed the Democrat vote total to get to that 81 million? Do you think the 72 million now is more reflective that 81 was just a fluke? What's your feeling on that?
Okay, so I'll tackle the meta question first. Is voter fraud significant in this and the previous election? And I haven't seen any evidence that convinces me that it is. As I understand it, Kamala Harris got a high turnout, higher than 2020, or the same amount of Democratic turnout in the battleground states. The place where turnout has dropped is in states where they were never up for grabs in the first place, and so people saw no reason to vote. I'll be honest, I did not vote this time. I did vote in 2016, I guess for idealistic reasons. I did not vote this time. There was no point in voting in California. And I think there are millions of people like me who knew which way their state would go, and so they just didn't feel incentivized to vote. And as for Joe Biden's record number of votes in 2020, I think it had virtually nothing to do with Joe Biden. It's just that there was a strong sentiment that people were tired of Donald Trump. And so he was simply the only alternative. I've almost never met anyone who's enthused about Joe Biden. Not in 2019, not in 2020, not in 2023 or 2024. Joe Biden has never been popular, right? He, by virtue of coming from a low population state, he emerged through freak chance and some skills to be a United States senator beginning in, I think, 1972 from the state of Delaware, which has just a tiny, tiny, tiny population. And over the long course of his political career, he's never been popular. And so he got that huge vote, nothing to do with him, except that he was the alternative to Donald Trump, for whom there was a growing loathing. There was a switch of 2% against Trump in the suburbs. So a lot of swing voters grew to loathe Donald Trump, and so they simply seized on Biden as the alternative. Now, on the day after the election, this discussion was in terms, where's the missing 20 million Democratic votes? So now the discussion has changed to where's the missing 9 million Democratic votes. And when we're done, we'll probably be talking about where are the missing 6 million votes, because votes are still being counted in places such as California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but like you say, Trump had an army of votes there at his disposal too there in California and other places, but you knew you were just pissing in the wind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If someone told you it matters, the popular vote matters, then Trump would have done better, because Luke would have drug his ass to the post office or the church or wherever it is that he goes to vote. So, okay. All right. I was thinking about one of your sayings is optimizing for truth.
Yeah.
And just to put a finer point on that, I wrote down reverence and righteousness. That's where you really know you're hitting the trifecta, when you can optimize for truth, reverence, and righteousness. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you I appreciate you letting me call and talk to you over these past 4 months, because the days are getting shorter, and you're more valuable than ever, my friend. So you have a good Sunday, and keep the good vibe going. See you, bro.
Thanks, bro. Take care. Good to talk to you. All right, let's try a little bit more here from Steve Saylor.
Well, be able to find large-scale data against which to test your supposition. Conversely, if there's a strong statistical pattern in the numbers, you should be able to come up with vivid real-life examples of it. If you can't think of any, maybe there's something wrong with the statistically esoteric analysis. That I assume all truths are connected to all other truths helps explain why my columns often seem to end somewhat abruptly and arbitrarily. I haven't reached a conclusive end of a topic because, from my perspective, there is no conclusion. Just an endless network of cause and effect. So what's really driving the real estate market? Gap in crack.
Law dean in the entire when I was alive, although small at the time, as in many ways, not always, of course, and we acknowledge that in our op-ed, I had a co-author, was a better time for America. Put it all together.
Yeah, I would say overall, Americans enjoyed far more social cohesion, social trust, and a higher quality of life in the 1950s than today.
And there was outrage in my school, outrage on campus, people complaining bitterly about me. The hatchet didn't fall at that point, but I started to be trolled. There are a lot of people on campus who don't have enough to do, and what they spend their time doing is digging dirt on individuals like me who dare to challenge the orthodoxy on campus. And it didn't take long before some of my other offending statements were unearthed, things that I had said in my podcast.
Okay, I think that's pretty well worn. This guy, however, is new to me. So
I think that the problem is you need a higher quality of staff than what the right-wing options have available. And here I'm talking both about the online dissident right and the sort of like established GOP. I think they both greatly underinvest in careers of people who are capable of doing a good job, right? Because it's not supposed to be glamorous. You're supposed to be like, an entrepreneur doing something productive. You're not supposed to be, lazy bones working in government or whatever, right? Like, what do you want to hand out? It sounds in a way like it doesn't quite fit this self-concept, right? You can sort of have alternatives where it's like, oh, it's about national security, and then it's okay to work for government. And like, that has some respect and it has some funding. But really, if you fire 1,000 people in a significant part of the US government, I claim you will struggle, genuinely struggle, to find 100 people you could hire. So even if you're achieving 90% efficiency, 90% reduction in personnel in employing, let's say, you're deploying software, you're cutting unnecessary functions, you're doing all of that, where are you going to find 100 people? I bet if you fire 1,000 government officials at a random American bureau and you try to hire 100 qualified people, of those people, 60 of them are still going to be Democrats. That they might have started pretending that they're Republicans. 20 of them are going to be really incompetent GOP Republicans. Maybe 5 of them will be software engineers who have earned a lot of money and now feel happy enough and they want to retire and they don't feel FOMO over the booming crypto market or over the revolution in AI. So isn't that actually kind of funny? Strong belief in an imminent technological revolution makes you much less likely to leave tech to go do something like government, right? And then maybe you'll have 5 people of those 100 that you hired who are sort of ideologically committed, strange people who have been writing on the internet, maybe analyzing the government or the economy. I wouldn't know. I'm joking here, but it's and it's an extremely rare talent. And I know because I sought it out. And even when I'm doing and I actually try to be very impartial in my.
Right, here's Charlie Kirk laying out Donald Trump's strategy.
However, I disagree. There were still some late breakers and undecided people. I do think that pool was less than 2%, though. I think so. Donald Trump's
2% is a lot, though.
And Donald Trump's campaign strategy, of which we helped execute on the ground in some of these states, was that, guys, don't spend your time knocking on doors about a suburban soccer mom who's weighing her options. Instead, because that takes 9 contacts to try to get her. 9 points of contact on average. Conversations, discussions, and they could be 30 minutes on it. Instead, turning point, go spend your time in very Republican areas where there are non-registered or what we call disengaged voters. People that like Trump, like his worldview. For example, the bro vote, right? And so this is where we spent our time, and we harvested, not ballot harvested, but we harvested in a very, very powerful way.
So remember the Nick Fuentes versus Charlie Kirk troll wars? And Nick Fuentes is really good at trolling, but Charlie Kirk is really good at making a difference on the ground.
At Arizona State University, for example, we registered thousands of young men to vote in fraternities. And that was way easier than us going to try to win over swing voters. And we did a little bit of that, but generally the Trump campaign was brilliant because they threw the Republican consultant playbook out. The Republican consultant playbook was spend all your time on the middle, on those like middle 15% swing voters and go all in. Trump campaign said, well, why don't we just make our base bigger? Why don't we just make the people who love us the most? And so what they looked at was demographics. And they realized if we can make the electorate 3% more masculine, and by the way, they were so smart to do this.
This is Susie?
This is Susie and James Blair and La Savita. And they were so smart because they said, wait a second, what is more important than race? Whether or not you're a man or a woman actually dictates your political affiliation far more of a correlation than your race. So they de-emphasized racial politics and they emphasized more of a masculine machismo approach. And boy, did it work. And not only did it work, you're running up against a woman, so it's easier to kind of make that argument. And so I don't mean to monopolize the time.
But this is really interesting. Keep going.
And so what the Trump campaign then did, the Republican consultant playbook that Karl Rove basically authored was everything is about high propensity. So there's two types of voters, high propensity and low propensity voters. A high propensity voter is typically college educated, lives in the suburbs. You know, they watch Chris, they watch CNN, they have an income over $100,000 a year, they have 2 kids and a picket fence, and they go to soccer games and they don't commit crimes. You know, that type of demo, right? High propensity voters is where the Republican Party has always been focused. Okay, but Trump came in and he said, no, we're going to focus on low propensity voters. The welder, the electrician, the carpenter, the police officer, or the person that's just not registered to vote. Where I thought that Donald Trump was going to win, and I wasn't as confident as anybody else, okay, was when I started to see the voter registration surge across the country. In the summer before, this last summer, new people that were registering to vote were registering at a clip 3-1 versus Democrat. In Pennsylvania, for the first time ever, in Pennsylvania, for the first time ever, we had every county in Pennsylvania, we were out registering Democrats for the first time ever. Now, mind you, what Josh Shapiro did as governor of Pennsylvania is he put in a thing called motor voter, which means you automatically get registered to vote. They thought that was going to help Democrats.
When you get your license.
When you get your driver's license. It helped Republicans because of lower, think about who's not registered to vote. It's typically lower propensity voters. And PBD, here's the kicker. Where do these people get their information? Lower propensity voters get information on TikTok. They're not watching CNN. They're not sitting, you know why? These folks are darn tired by the time they get home. They're not turning on cable news. They're watching NFL football games. They're the ones that are not going to be able to quote to you, Marbury. They're not, by the way.
It's also this.
Yeah, it's also the phone. So what Donald Trump campaign did is they hacked the 2024 election, not in a way that people would think, where they said, wait a second, everyone has a supercomputer in the right-hand pocket. Why are we worried about what CNN is saying or MSNBC is saying? Why don't we win the information war? And then finally, the kicker. They said, why don't we go on the most ambitious, over-the-top, low-propensity voter communication strategy on Theo Von, Joe Rogan, Nelk Boys, Logan Paul, influencer strategies, right? And so what they said is there's this whole reservoir. And the final kicker, my mandate at Turning Point was very simple. Charlie, turn Trump supporters.
Okay, that's interesting. A few other points from my ex bookmarks. Kamala Harris campaign dished out $500,000 to Al Sharpton's nonprofit just weeks before her big interview with him. So Kamala not only paid millions to celebrities for them to twerk on stage and to read half-ass scripted endorsements off their phones, she also funneled money for infomercials disguised as normal media appearances. $1 million to Oprah's Harpo Studios to use her set, $100,000 to Call Her Daddy podcast for studio renovation, $500,000 to Al Sharpton's nonprofit. And she didn't go on Joe Rogan, Theo Von, or Lex Friedman. Steve Saylor tweets, many people assume that academic wokeness is an elite top-down movement originating at Harvard and Stanford that threatens honest, directional state universities. Instead, it's been more of a bottom-up movement centered among academic pros like Robin DiAngelo at Westfield State University. This is...
Hey, my fellow ladies out there. So, men think they own you. Take it from somebody that used to be a man. You got boobs. You got a vajayjay. Guess what, honey? You own them. Trust me, they want it. Make them own it.
Powerful, powerful. Under Trump, U.S. foreign policy will cease promoting long-standing American ideals That combined with unexpected surge of corrupt foreign policy practices will leave the U.S. looking like a garden variety great power. Oh my God. How awful. Right, a little bit more advice for Elon and Trump.
Analysis. But when I try to find good sources that aren't just propaganda, that are trying to understand the world, it's like nominally Democratic Party affiliated or Democratic affiliated with more steps or university affiliated with more steps. That's like 90% of the sources, right? It's like almost inevitable. And I don't know, how do you overcome that talent disparity? I think that's a multi-year effort. Maybe that's an effort that begins now. Like if I was a right wing, I gave the left wing strategy, right? The Democratic Party strategy. If I was a Republican strategist, I'd be like, okay, we're going to have a Donald Trump presidency and we're going to cut what we can, but we're going to start developing a deeper bench of talent. And by the next time, we're going to have junior people who understand that it's a good career track to go into civil service and reform government. This is a good career choice. Maybe one solution is to radically increase the salaries of the top performers, something that I think Elon could argue to the American public. Like that's another one, right? Like usually the assumption is that, and we've talked about this in the show before, right? I made the argument that actually you should fire many, many employees, but maybe the remaining government employees are better compensated, right? That's sort of kind of the social contract in like a place like Singapore, and causes top talent in Singapore to go into government and then do a very good job. I think that, Elon could argue this to the American public. Honestly, Trump could argue it to the American public. And I think the base would understand it. It just goes, again, contrary to some of these like default assumptions where, let's put it this way, efficiency is not the same thing as austerity. And this nuance is important. You can be very efficient. You can buy for 12 cents what previously cost $1. You cannot buy the same thing for 1 cent that previously cost $1. And knowing exactly where you are on that radical increase, or radical decrease in cost and radical increase in efficiency before you start hitting like really terrible negative returns, right? That's super important. And I think that the strategy should be, this Trump term is about developing talent and about embedding people in the civil service, not just the legal system, the civil service, and unshackling them from the ideological cliches of the right, because most of Trump and most of the institutional power on the right is this sort of weird complex of DC NGOs that has very little to do with either Trump's agenda or Elon's agenda, right? Like the ideology that comes out of it is like by default kind of strange. And it's kind of this like, it's kind of like stuck to a GOP that is electorally as dead as the, old school Democratic Party, I think is now dead electorally, even if it lives on the mind of Substack pundits, left and right. So I think the strategy then is like, it has to be for a JD, 8 years of JD, or I don't know, maybe 8 years of Ivanka or something like that. Some sort of like.
Okay, here's some brief interviews with Trump supporters.
Trump is president right now.
He's currently the president.
Absolutely.
He is still president. There's a lot of things that this Biden person does not have, like the presidential seal and things like that are pretty obvious.
Biden doesn't have the presidential seal?
No.
When he speaks, there's a presidential seal in front of him.
It's not real.
What is he doing as president?
He is in charge of the military.
Great.
The military is in charge of this whole thing.
The military were put in charge in 2018 when President Trump signed an executive order.
The American military arms that are going to Ukraine, we have Donald Trump to thank for that?
No.
That's
two militaries.
There's two militaries.
There's a good and a bad.
So there's two militaries. Donald Trump's in charge of the good one.
Yes.
Biden's in charge of the bad military?
That's exactly right.
All right, that's from The Daily Show. That's pretty good.
Deeply Trump endorsed continuity, because what you're building is a replacement, not just for the civil service, you're building a replacement for a GOP that did not want Trump, that did not want Elon, that did not want left players.
Where the talent is going to come for the right is a fascinating question. And there's sort of this almost like question as to how much of it is farmed, sort of, hey, more of a, long game, play at the university level, et cetera, try to diversify, some of that politically. But there's also this question of how many people can be converted from the existing sort of talent pool.
How genuine is the conversion?
Right, that's true.
I mean, again, if I was playing a left-wing strategy, I would say, actually, it's a good idea to play entryism on the Trump administration because you can pull it far more left than you could pull a Democratic Party administration. Like, I don't know, maybe there's some effective altruist working on that utilitarian argument right now. I hear some of them were very depressed yesterday at various parties in the East Bay. It's interesting, this segues a little bit to Hereticon, which is a conference we both attended last week. The Founders Fund puts on, it's the second one they've done it. And my read of it was that it sort of, coincided with this broader evolution that where the first Hereticon was actually about heretical ideas. And now the culture has moved so much that this is just the tech right, or a conference for the tech right and tech right adjacent. And some of the people that attended are not the same diehards that were attending the first year. Like the tent has expanded. Yes. I don't even think everyone there was a Trump supporter necessarily. Maybe it was 80%, whatever, maybe, it was a high majority. But I think it is the tent expanding. And, Elon is one of the best recruiters in the world. So, and Thiel is pretty good too. And, there's an open question as to what will be the actual impact or influence of the tech right on this administration. I think one of the biggest positive developments that I think will happen just because the incentives point that way is the replacement of the legacy, dysfunctional, large corporations that the US government is used to doing business with a new crop of companies, which hopefully can deliver the goods. Like, I think that if you replaced a lot of the contracting that, Boeing used to do with a drone startup, with honestly, why not replace it? What function does Boeing provide the US government that cannot be replaced by Anduril plus SpaceX?
Exactly. Right.
Right? I mean, it would change the narrative of SpaceX. So maybe Elon wants to spin off something off SpaceX and say, these rockets are aiming for Mars. These rockets are aiming for Moscow. Totally different rockets. Look, they have a different paint job and a different name and a different brand. So maybe that's what he would want to do. Or someone in SpaceX is delegated to do that. And of course, there's the problem of this conflict of interest, right? Because if you have an official position in the administration, then it's hard to compete for government contracts. And I'm sure there are legal workarounds, but that's a problem. So I think we'll see a flourishing of defense tech, because the sort of tech right owes nothing to Raytheon, nothing to Lockheed Martin, nothing to Boeing. The normal GOP might hate this, though. So a lot of the Republican lawmakers will not like this, because this used to be part of their portfolio and part of their base. So in a very fundamental way, what's happening with the tech right, it's a bid. Hey, let us use this technology we developed in the civilian sector. Let's use it for government. The government should pay us to do this. Like, look, the government probably, needs websites that work, right? Like, that would be neat, right? Websites that work. Something like Estonia's digital citizenship system. We might have talked about Estonia or not. If not, we'll talk about it in a future episode. And I think that there's potentially both a lot of money to make there, a lot of good to do because the service the citizens have is better. And finally, from a national security standpoint, America's actually underplaying its power, where the US could have a 21st century military. But as soon as you start pushing to actually hire companies like Palantir, Anduril, or hypothetical SpaceX spin-offs, or Boom Supersonic, for example, maybe they'll pivot from producing just planes to producing supersonic drones, right? Or maybe there'll be dozens of other defense companies. I'm sure you have a long list. This is kind of a booming thing here in town. As soon as this happens, you're going to start having wars with the Pentagon careerists, who are not necessarily culturally all left, not at all. Culturally, a lot of them are conservative. Politically, some of them are democratic at the highest level, because that's just how the appointments have been made over time. Now, the military is not only a very apolitical institution, but the Pentagon is a great power center, and it sort of is making plans in the same broken way that NASA made its plans, where the goal of a proposed space plan is to satisfy all the constituencies within NASA. So you need an International Space Station, you need the Lunar Gateway, you need a moon program, you need the Mars robots, because this is all the stuff we were already working on. So we have to save it, right? We have to save these teams. And in the Pentagon, it's the F-35 is going to be the backbone of the U.S. Air Force until 2088, which is honestly, the most science fiction sounding thing I've heard about the future of the 21st century. But it's also just America's official air superiority strategy. So it's super funny to me that, but how are you going to do that? You're going to really upset all the Air Force guys? If they really want to just...
So Dan Bongino was at the UFC fight with Donald Trump last night in Madison Square Garden. Could you imagine Dan Bongino becoming selected as the head of the Secret Service? That would be shocking. That would be surprising. Here's some video of Dan Bongino, a flamethrower on Rumble, a part owner of Rumble, someone who was detailing Secret Service failings with the Trump assassination attempts, a major force in right-wing media. You have to be among the top 10 most influential right-wing voices in American media. And he served in the U.S. Secret Service for many, many years, has very strong critiques, and it would not be surprising to see Donald Trump select this guy to run the Secret Service.
Be able to fly these really fast, fun things, and they enjoy it to see other younger men fly them. And it's like almost a hobby. So I don't know what I would do. I would maybe create like a special wing of the Air Force where it's like purely ceremonial, like the guys on horses that ride next to Queen Elizabeth II. There'd just be a special squad of F-35s just maintained to do air shows and to fly with Air Force One. It's like an honor guard, and that's going to be their role. And other than that, we're not going to have men flight by 20.
Right. If you want more on this idea, see the documentary Blue Angels. It's on Amazon Prime. Just stunning, the dedication of that group.
For you, that would be that would be how I would do it. And like all the flyboys retire and have a good time, and a new generation, a much smaller generation of very skilled flyboys can do their thing. And I don't want to be dismissive, but I'm just pointing out you have to like actually offend a lot of people, right? To do some of these things, it would require transitioning away from a 20th century military to a 21st century military. And like again, there's actually massive growth in Space Force, which is actually a great idea by Trump. Like there's going to be so much stuff that Space Force can do. And in addition to this, energy startups, a strong push to enable every single energy startup we can in the US. It's not quite true that we need nuclear reactors for AI. I think that's very clever, but a clever attempt to redirect some of that energy. In reality, we could just burn a lot more natural gas and achieve basically the same energy result for the AI training models. But narratively, using new technologies to solve the problem of another new technology, I think technologists love this, right? So ideologically, we said, we're going to Mars, and we're going to be achieving 50% of our national power from nuclear, like by and make it ambitious. Say, we are going to build 40 nuclear reactors over the next 4 years. And then people say that's impossible. Nothing. And then you say nothing's impossible for America that China can do. Everything that China can do, we can do better. And then what are they going to say? That we're inherently more incompetent? But make it like very concrete like that. And then the story is, we're going nuclear. Great news. It's going to save the planet. You don't even need green communism for that. We're going to build a lot of AI. That's great. We're still going to make sure it's safe, but we're going to get a lot of data centers here, and we're going to make as many chips. We're going to make a chip fab, and China's going to pay for it. It's going to pay for it through the tariffs. You could say we're going to, et cetera. And then you add some space exploration, and then suddenly you have a very positive narrative that's not alienating to the American public because they feel included in it. They're not being farmed for ad money anymore. They're going to Mars.
All right, this bloke, Samo Burja, Samoburja, seems to have a lot of great ideas. I'll talk to you later.